Chapter 641, Cutting Grass and Removing Roots. The third rank wizard of the Borderland would definitely belong to the Stargate Council. But even within the Stargate Council itself, there were different opinions. However, what should have originally been the Glare family head and Stargate Council chairman each recommending one backup candidate became three backup wizards, due to both Gorsa and Wind Sprite pair simultaneously proposing Saul as the third rank. For other second-rank wizards, without backing from powerful forces, they didn't even have a chance to know about this selection. If others became third rank beforehand, not to mention the probability, what awaited them was either expulsion from the Borderland or going to the Sighing Wall, that place where the most third-rank wizards gathered. But although the selection was conducted secretly, some people who shouldn't have known had already anticipated the development of events. For example, Kismet. After saying goodbye to Lucy, he went alone to Clark's former residence. The large tree that once hung with white wind chimes, along with the tree house above, had turned into stone sculptures, gradually cracking under the erosion of the northwest wind. Despite having dealt with Clark, Kismet felt no sadness when arriving at the other party's former residence. Because of Clark's sudden death, the second-rank wizards and other low-rank wizards who had previously attached themselves to him were gathering together, thinking about future arrangements. Those who fantasized about establishing their own strongholds or switching allegiances had also rushed to the Wind Chime Tree House upon receiving the news, hoping to find some third-rank wizard inheritance here. However, most people still underestimated the gap between third and second rank. So when Kismet arrived, he saw more than 10 wizard sculptures under the tree house. Like the Wind Chime Tree House, they had been petrified by some unknown force, gradually drying and cracking. Such a scene quickly scared away others, so when Kismet came several days later, there were no traces of other wizards around. Ignoring the petrified wizards around him, whose faces were frozen in expressions of terror, Kismet walked step by step to the base of the tree. He looked up, leaped into the air, his body soaring like a bird, then drilled into the tree house through the window. Banged! His feet hit the ground and immediately broke through the floor. Kismet had to jump up again and hover in midair. Despite being choked by the dust stirred up in the room, Kismet was still in a good mood as he greeted the empty reclining chair. "Pleasant death, Clark." As soon as he finished speaking, a vague shadow suddenly appeared on the empty chair, but looking carefully, one could discern Clark's outline from the shadow. Gorsa, he trespassed into, the Borderland. Shadow Clark's voice was very blurred, as if coming from the distant mountains. But Kismet could still hear very clearly. "I already know about this." He shrugged, saying indifferently, "I felt that Mummy Wizard was problematic from the start, so I followed him into the tower and watched him set up the fake Storm Eye to lure you in. Thinking about it, I'm probably an accomplice too." Clark, who had originally wanted Kismet to report Gorsa's whereabouts to the Stargate Council, was suddenly stunned in place. Kismet acted as if he hadn't just said something shocking and stepped forward to touch Clark's shadow with interest. His hand unsurprisingly passed through the shadow, as if there was nothing there at all. "Did you leave part of your consciousness and soul in the dream about the tree house?" Kismet. The shadow let out a hoarse howl. Instantly, a strand of Kismet's hair petrified, shattered, and silently fell to the ground. But that was all. "Although you absorbed the life force of the entire tree house and those wizards who coveted your inheritance, trying to deal with me with such methods is still." He was halfway through speaking when he suddenly found his feet had lost sensation. Looking down, he discovered his feet had somehow already petrified. Well, I underestimated you. Indeed, third rank is third rank. Even after death, the remaining power is still amazing. I will devour you too." As if absorbing part of Kismet's life force, Clark's voice gradually became clear. Meanwhile, the petrification on Kismet's feet was slowly spreading upward. Though called slow, in reality, it would take less than a minute for Clark's remnant soul to turn Kismet entirely into a stone statue. Kismet still had one choice. While his upper body could still move freely, immediately fly away from the tree house to a place Clark couldn't influence. However, despite just being proven wrong by Clark, Kismet still had no intention of leaving. He just watched with interest as the petrification spread from his feet to his legs and gradually affected his waist and abdomen. Let me see what the great Dreammaker, Lord Clark, can achieve. Kismet's eyes lit up, as if appreciating someone else's destruction. But the terrible petrification suddenly stagnated just as it reached his chest. The moisture in his skin and the fluids in his blood vessels and bones began to stir restlessly. Kismet immediately showed a pained expression, but he forced himself not to scream out. The petrification on his lower body seemed to have seen a ghost, retreating from his body at an even faster speed. "Are you testing me?" Suddenly, several wounds burst open on Kismet's body, and blood like mice that had been imprisoned for a long time rushed out from his wounds, gathering in midair to form a blood sphere. The blood sphere's surface rippled slightly, and soon a woman's face appeared. Seeing that face, the originally vague Clark immediately dispersed like smoke. Kismet's face immediately turned pale as death. But he still showed a twisted smile. "I can swear on my life that I absolutely wasn't testing you, lovely city Lord Ophelia." As soon as the word "lovely" left his mouth, Kismet lost his floating ability and immediately fell toward the ground at extreme speed, as if struck down by a huge stone. "Don't forget your pursuit," Ophelia said coldly, letting Kismet crash through the ground and into the tree trunk. Then the bloody face slowly turned toward the chair where Clark had disappeared. The power of dreams is good, but the caster himself also easily becomes immersed in dreams. Perhaps that's the real reason for your ultimate failure. But since you're already dead, die cleanly and don't run out halfway to cause trouble. The bloody sphere suddenly exploded like a bomb, blood droplets splattering throughout the entire room, then spreading on the walls and furniture. Finally, the entire room turned blood red. Clark's remnant soul, which had disappeared somewhere, appeared again. "Ophelia, must you do this?" The roaring voice carried faint despair. Ophelia's voice came from all directions in the room. "Although my power cannot be transmitted here, dreams always depend on consciousness. As long as there are no consciousness carriers here, your dream will disappear forever." With Ophelia's cold voice, red blood gradually covered the entire room. Clark could no longer maintain the pride of a third-rank wizard and began cursing wildly. However, when the red color dyed the tree house, the big tree outside, and the surrounding petrified people all red, Clark's cursing voice abruptly stopped. Ophelia's aura also dissipated immediately. There was no other life around, only Kismet, who had been smashed into the soil below the tree roots. He had almost no moisture left on his body, all skin and bones, like a skeleton. Kismet struggled to get up, immediately leaning against the tree root and dry heaving once. My head is so dizzy." Chapter 642, Three Candidates. Nefrit continent had mostly mountainous terrain, but the tallest structure on the entire continent wasn't the highest peak of these mountain ranges, but the Stargate Council's observatory. Stargate Council Chairman Alec almost always sat in the high-backed chair at the head of the observatory. From this angle, with just a slight lift of his head, he could see the infinite starry sky, and with a slight lowering of his eyes, he could gaze at the surging ocean. In the hearts of Stargate Council members, Alec had already become the incarnation of lightning, and therefore, the sky above the Council's observatory was always clear. This allowed for constant observation of changes in the starry sky. A young assistant named Murich, not yet 100 years old, walked over carrying a file. He had once been a second-rank wizard specializing in wood attribute magic, but since coming to the Stargate Council and becoming Alec's assistant, he hadn't touched wood attribute magic books for over 10 years. Now just over 100 years old, he was quite young by Stargate Council standards and was also recognized as one of the geniuses here. However, the once high-spirited youth now had a full head of white hair, with only his face still looking young. But his eyes had suddenly mutated during one stargazing session, protruding from their sockets like two telescopes, with the eyes inside becoming completely transparent glass spheres. After being rescued, he didn't mind and even said this made it more convenient for him to observe the starry sky and see more clearly. Chairman, Miss Lucy has sent back news from the borderland. Wind Sprite Payer has proposed Gorsa's apprentice Saul as a candidate for the next third-rank wizard. Counselor Norton has also agreed, but Counselor Norton simultaneously nominated another Glare family member, Corey, as one of the candidates. Alec, who had been gazing at the starry sky, turned his golden eyes toward Murich. Saul. This is the first time I've heard this name too. It seems Gorsa has protected him well. Do you think Gorsa has been planning this for a long time? Murich's eyes retracted a bit as he looked down at the materials in his hands. Indeed, a young boy specializing in dark attributes, age 17 years old. He's clearly a puppet cultivated from the ground up. Murich tapped his finger on the book, making a dull sound. Such a person, even with our help, cannot push open that door within his body. This is a waste of resources. Murich looked at Saul's name on the paper, wanting to mark a big X on it like he was conducting an experiment. Perhaps Alec wasn't as angry as Murich. He remained composed and calm, like the eternally unchanging starry sky above. However, for us, pushing open that door to the starry sky is also extremely difficult. We still don't have a 30% chance of success. Murich stiffened, then said unwillingly, "How can he be compared to the Stargate's research?" Alec seemed not to hear, still saying quietly, "Pushing open the door within the body opens the connection channel between internal and external magical power. Pushing open the door to the starry sky opens the passage between this world and other worlds. If third ranks fail to push open their door, they will become monsters under the stirring of internal and external magical power. If we fail to push open our door..." Murich also knew how difficult their research was, but he had long passed the stage of being defeated by difficulty. That would just be falling on the path of pursuing truth. Alec smiled. This was exactly why he chose such a young person as Murich to be his assistant. Perhaps Murich's personality and abilities weren't the best among all assistants, but he never gave up. Through Murich, Alec thought of Gorsa again. That young man was also someone who never gave up. It's just that his unwavering research path was too shocking. Even Alec had once thought he had gone mad. But thinking about it now, being able to continue on a path that everyone else believed would definitely lead to pollution, and madness was also a kind of incomparable courage. Then let Saul also become a candidate. Seeing Chairman Alec once again looking toward the starry sky in thought, Murich knew he had lost interest in the third-rank candidate for the borderland. As long as the chairman didn't object, Murich himself had no authority to reject a third-rank wizard's proposal. However, since the Wind Sprite and Glare family had both put forward their favored candidates, as another major force within the Stargate Council, they naturally had the right to nominate a candidate as well. Several names rotated in Murich's mind. Finally, his eyes extended and he spoke a name. "Chairman, how about letting Luke also participate in the selection?" Chairman Alec nodded slightly. He didn't care much about such matters. Murich smiled. It just so happens that Saul and Luke are both wizards specializing in dark attributes. Let them compete fairly. After Murich left, Alec continued looking up at the starry sky. The Stargate has already appeared. After seeing off Brando, Saul welcomed Jiajiagu, who hadn't visited for a long time. Jiajiagu was very enthusiastic this time and gave Saul even lower prices, leaving Saul somewhat puzzled. He let Jiajiagu stay overnight and checked the pollution on his body. Saul was delighted to find that Jiajiagu himself had almost no pollution left. After Saul cleaned the puppet on his back that filtered pollution, he let Jiajiagu leave. But recently, the Purity Wizard Tower seemed particularly popular. Not long after Jiajiagu left, the white mushrooms once again released spores as a warning. However, this time, even after all the spores in the air had dispersed, Saul still didn't see any guests appear by Rhine Lake. "Tower Master, shall I go take a look?" Marsh was still holding a kitchen knife, having been cooking. "I'll go take a look instead." There was no choice. There were only a few people in the entire Wizard Tower who could cross Rhine Lake, and Marsh, aside from having explosive luck, wasn't strong in other areas. Saul also didn't want to order Senior Byron around, even though the other party didn't mind Saul's commands. So, even though the Wizard Tower had been established for over a year, Saul still had to personally greet guests. He whistled softly. The pale yellow giant bird that was grooming its feathers on the tower top immediately flew down, extending 4 long tentacle-like appendages. Saul grabbed one of the long tentacles and was suddenly lifted into the air by the giant bird. The giant bird flew very fast, crossing Rhine Lake in almost the blink of an eye and landing beside the mushroom forest that had just issued the warning. While landing, Saul didn't forget to equip himself with a layer of armor and released Herman from within his body. Herman's silver figure immediately transformed into silver lightning, shuttling through the mushroom forest. Soon Herman rushed out of the mushroom forest, looking both shocked and unable to help gloating as he said to Saul, "It's Kismet. Master, he's severely injured and unconscious in the mushroom forest." Hearing this news, Saul wasn't as happy as Herman. His expression was serious, causing Herman to also restrain his smile. Saul rushed into the mushroom forest, and indeed found a man so thin he was almost skeletal leaning against a giant mushroom on the outer edge. His breathing was weak, his mental power fluctuations minimal. If not for that head of slightly curly, silver-colored medium-length hair, it would have been very difficult to recognize him as Kismet from his appearance alone. Saul landed in front of Kismet, and the previously unconscious Kismet suddenly opened his eyes, showing Saul a weak smile. "Still alive. Came to find my master to save my life." "Who injured you?" "Sky City Lord Ophelia." Kismet pouted, showing a completely aggrieved expression. "To completely kill Clark and help clear the stumbling blocks on your advancement path, Master. Your brother really risked his life." Chapter 643, First Glimpse of Fate Lines. Saul carried Kismet out of the mushroom forest, then called for the giant bird and tied him to one of its long tentacles. "This is not," the weak Kismet protested, "the treatment an injured person should receive." "You should be grateful I didn't throw you out." Saul tugged on the tentacle in his hand. Sensing this, the giant bird immediately took flight with both of them. Flying high in the air, Kismet seemed unable to withstand the strong wind pressure. His eyes rolled back and he fainted again. Saul glanced at him and felt his heart sink. He understood that probably only Ophelia had the ability to injure Kismet this severely. Saul brought Kismet down from the tower top and handed him over to Steward Hope. After a preliminary examination, Kismet was severely anemic and dehydrated. Indeed, it was Ophelia. This fourth-rank wizard must have used the blood and fluids in Kismet's body to do something. Could it be that Kismet's so-called complete elimination of Clark actually involved asking Ophelia to intervene? Ophelia was a fourth-rank wizard. For the balance of the borderland, even if she descended with an avatar, she couldn't use overly powerful forces. So she would use Kismet's blood to cast spells. This way, the spell's influence would be controlled to the level between second-rank and third-rank wizards. It was just unfortunate for Kismet. Tools never had good endings. 3 days later. Since Kismet still hadn't awakened, Saul softened momentarily and kept him in the Purity Wizard Tower, under the joint care of Agu and Steward Hope. Saul himself continued his research after advancing to second rank. On this day, he had already memorized all the precautions for advancement and completely stabilized the mental power that had been restless since entering second rank. Now that he had some confidence in self-control, he returned to the fourth floor of the Wizard Tower, sealed the room, closed his eyes, and entered deep meditation. The purpose of this meditation was to organize his spellcasting core, the ability he had comprehended from his locator. Currently, Saul called it Fate Lines. When Saul closed his eyes and the surroundings became silent due to magical sealing, only the sounds of heartbeat and breathing could be heard. But as the meditation deepened, Saul gradually heard another sound. It was the soft rustle of pages turning gently, as if sitting in a quiet, spacious library, silently reading the book before him. If he continued deeper, Saul would see the dead wizard's diary located at the innermost part of his soul and consciousness body. But his purpose this time wasn't the diary. Saul gradually turned his attention to himself, starting from nerve endings, gradually considering important internal organs, and finally converging on his brain on his forehead. Gradually, he finally saw again a semi-transparent white thread extending from his forehead. Last time, he had grasped this thread and seen his possible future. But this time Saul wasn't in a hurry to observe his future. Instead, he slowly pulled his attention back along the thread, returning to his own body. Then he was shocked to discover that in the perspective of deep meditation, he had become a tangle of intertwined, yet spacious light threads. The ball of threads twisted and rotated, wound together, but hadn't truly formed a dead knot. Intertwined glowing threads. Saul immediately thought of the meditation diagram he was currently using, where one of the patterns was indeed intertwined glowing lines. Does the fourth pattern on the evolution diagram represent fate lines? There wouldn't be many wizards who could see fate lines, but Saul wouldn't be the only one either. Saul knew that some wizards were very skilled at prophecy. Due to prolonged distraction, Saul suddenly jumped out of deep meditation, and naturally the tangled ball of threads before his eyes disappeared. All Saul saw was his own chest. I still can't maintain stable deep meditation. I'll observe once more, then rest for a few days to avoid cognitive confusion. Saul entered deep meditation again, though he couldn't help thinking. All second-rank wizards gain extended abilities from their locators. The ability I gained isn't for enhancing combat power. That's fine, but is observing my future really its only function? Although this function was also very powerful, Saul always felt that fate lines couldn't be that simple. After seeing the white fate line again, Saul struggled to suppress his emotions, stopped his wild thoughts, and continued organizing his condition along his fate line. The fate line exposed outside his forehead represented the future, but the fate lines hidden inside his body didn't let Saul see his past. It seemed to complement the nightmare butterfly's abilities. However, when tracing the fate lines within his body, Saul felt his mental power and magical power became more coordinated, and the tangled fate lines within his body shifted slightly, becoming more orderly. But he hadn't organized for long, probably just a few minutes, before Saul felt fatigue. Moreover, feedback from his spiritual body told him that if he continued, he might even become too tired to lift a finger. Saul decisively stopped and prepared to recover from deep meditation. But when he shifted his attention from inside his body back outside, he discovered two more semi-transparent thin threads around his body. Both threads extended up from the floor beneath Saul's feet, circling around him without actually touching him. One thread was also white but intermittent, looking like a hand-drawn dotted line. The other thread was grayish-white with a granular texture that seemed wrapped in ice crystals. Saul had seen other people's fate lines before, but none were as special as these two before him. The Wizard Tower currently has only a few people with independent soul consciousness: Senior Byron, Kismet, and Camus. But counting this way, there was still one fate line missing. These two fate lines extending to me, do they also represent that their future fates will have many intersections with mine? Saul was somewhat curious about which two people these fate lines connected to, but his current state wasn't suitable for touching other people's fate lines. Saul decided to rest first and try again tomorrow. Then, as fatigue gradually deepened, Saul exited deep meditation. He opened his eyes. The room hadn't changed at all, and there were no signs of the ceiling magic being disturbed. Saul released the magical effect and sat back on his moderately firm mushroom bed. The ability gained from the Death Wizard Diary leans toward fate. Isn't this closer to light attribute magic domains? Recalling his advancement path, Saul found that he seemed to be gradually changing from a wizard specializing in dark attributes to one focusing on souls and fate. And such wizards often specialized in light attributes. Master Morden, who had been staying in the diary without soul armament, left writing on the diary pages. You need not worry about specializing in elements. Actually, specializing in a certain element is to help apprentices and low-rank wizards better determine their research direction, to avoid gradually losing their way in the vast ocean of magical knowledge and becoming polluted. Although you are still a second-rank wizard, your research direction has stabilized. As long as you focus on this goal, even if you study earth attribute or metal attribute magical knowledge, there would be no problem. My goal. Saul actually didn't have any particular field he wanted to research. He just wanted to use the Death Wizard Diary to become stronger quickly and safely. Safety was a basic requirement, and quickly was often forced by circumstances. Like now. Chapter 644, Adams. Since Morden, who had once been a second-rank wizard, had been staying in the diary, and Saul mostly didn't shield external images, Morden was very clear about the challenges Saul currently faced. After a moment of consideration, Morden continued writing on the black pages. Master, since you have decided to advance again as soon as possible, let me tell you the knowledge about third-rank wizards that I obtained during the Kemah Empire period. Your master didn't mention this to you, probably because he didn't want you to be distracted by other matters during advancement. But as the diary's master, you are sufficient to bear this revolutionary knowledge. Moreover, your acceptance of new knowledge is extremely high. Some of your ideas even coincide with it. Your talent in this area is even more enviable than your talent in mental power. Saul didn't get lost in Morden's praise. Instead, he straightened his attitude and cautiously asked Morden, "What new knowledge?" Elemental particles in magic are divided into many types, commonly including dark, light, earth, metal, fire, wood, lightning, etc. After entering third rank, wizards have opened a direct transmission channel between internal magical power and the outside world. But if wizards only select corresponding attribute elemental particles for absorption each time they cast magic, it's hard to guarantee there are no other impurities during absorption. The impurities here refer not only to foreign substances that can cause pollution, but also other elemental particles. If introduced in small amounts, it's generally not a big problem. But if introduced in large amounts, or if the magic cast requires particularly high precision, it's possible for spellcasting to fail due to these tiny impurities. More terrifyingly, it might cause backlash and pollution. Exactly. I also thought about this when Master Gorsa was explaining it to me. Saul nodded. Using one's own magical power is like drinking filtered distilled water, while introducing external magical power through the internal gate is like directly drinking spring water. And you don't know what impurities the spring water contains. If it's just unabsorbable dust, that's fine. But if someone upstream poisoned it, then drinking the spring water would have fatal risks. Of course, as third-rank wizards, they certainly wouldn't directly drink spring water without any preparation. Morden continued, using Saul's metaphor. Because when third-rank wizards cast large-scale magic, they no longer bring elemental particles into their bodies to accumulate and fuse into their own magical power, but drive elemental particles through rapid conversion via the gate within their bodies. So every third-rank wizard will very carefully modify the gate within their body, making the gate possess certain filtering abilities. However, no matter how powerful this ability is, it cannot completely avoid impurities. It's said that only upon reaching fourth rank and comprehending high-level concepts of space and life can one ignore pollution absorbed through spell casting. Need to comprehend high-level concepts of space and life, Saul sighed. Indeed, the higher the level, the more one discovers how much unknown still lies ahead. He thought again of his master Gorsa. Gorsa not only pushed his students hard, he also pushed himself. Also, having entered third rank for just a year or two, he was already starting to assault fourth rank. However, when Gorsa was still a second-rank wizard, he had already mastered partial knowledge of space. What he lacked now might only be about life. Wait, he's been researching resurrection all along. Could it be to explore high-level concepts about life? So when he was second rank, he had already begun steadily marching toward fourth rank. Hiss. Saul's teeth ached a bit. Don't think about it, don't think about it. I'll follow my own pace. Morden continued. Morden waited for Saul to digest what he had just said before writing new text. When third-rank wizards were solving the problem of elemental particle impurities introduced during gate conversion, they discovered a terrifying fact sufficient to overturn all previous understanding. Morden's handwriting was slightly messy, obviously excited when mentioning this knowledge. Multiple third-rank wizards successively discovered that elemental particles are actually not the smallest, most primitive particles. They are actually composed of even smaller particles. I don't know what these smaller particles are called, nor whether they also have different types. I only know that third-rank wizards named them primitive particles, later simplified to atoms. Atoms. Fortunately, Saul was now a second-rank wizard with quite strong self-control. Otherwise, he really didn't know if he would have spit out his saliva. Although in his wizard studies, Saul had also applied quite a bit of knowledge from his previous world. But the deeper he studied, the more he discovered the differences between the two worlds. Perhaps just a very tiny change in underlying logic had caused earth-shaking changes in the entire world. Saul had also wondered whether elemental particles of different attributes had fixed compositional patterns like chemical elements. But the wizard world lacked means of observing extremely microscopic particles. Even with special microscopes, one couldn't see elemental particles that only mental power could capture. So traditional physical means couldn't study magical elemental particles. Therefore, Saul hadn't expected that one day he would hear this familiar term again. Calm down, calm down. Saul flicked his forehead with his finger. If I apply previous life knowledge just because the names are similar, I'll definitely make empirical errors. However, during experimental verification, I can verify based on past knowledge characteristics, which might save some detours. Having calmed down again, Saul continued listening to Morden's explanation. After discovering the existence of atoms, third-rank wizards would construct modification formations on the gates within their bodies, directly breaking down other absorbed elemental particles into atoms, thus avoiding the impact of impurities on magic. Of course, the pollution they absorb cannot be removed this way, since pollution isn't particles after all. Saul looked at his hands. Pollution isn't particles. My method of absorbing pollution uses my own soul body, meaning pollution should act on the soul body. Speaking of which, how does one decompose elemental particles into atoms? I really don't know this. Master, I'm not third rank after all. I learned this knowledge when I was king of the Kema Empire, having the fortune to hear it from Wizard Murphy, the creator of the Sighing Wall. The creator of the Sighing Wall, he's a fourth-rank wizard. Saul hadn't expected that the Sighing Wall protecting a quarter of the continent's borders was actually built by one wizard. This was the power of a fourth-rank wizard. Yes, Wizard Murphy is a very great wizard. In this dark age, he chose to use all his power to create the Sighing Wall and bound himself to it, forever stationed in Stat's far north. Stationed in the far north, leading third-rank wizards to resist the abyssal black tide, he truly is a great wizard. Regardless of his initial intentions, the Sighing Wall protected Stat and even the entire world. That was enough. Although he didn't have specific methods for decomposing elemental particles, Saul was very happy to hear this knowledge. Thank you, Morden. This is what I should do, Master. Actually, when I first obtained this knowledge, I should have studied it carefully. But at the time, I only thought about how to quickly open the gate within my body and didn't digest the new knowledge. Only now, having finally reorganized this knowledge, do I realize just how powerful third-rank wizards are. Morden's handwriting couldn't show his tone, but Saul, who was spiritually connected to the diary, could feel his loss and regret. If I had understood the power of third-rank wizards then, instead of being carried away by my identity as an empire's master, I wouldn't have led over 1,000 wizards and apprentices to Hanging Valley to intercept Baton's dying third rank. Then they wouldn't have followed me to complete destruction in the sunless depths of Hanging Hands Valley. That is my eternal regret and remorse. Chapter 645, A Very Long Time. Morden didn't remain depressed for long. It was just that words he had kept bottled up finally had a chance to be expressed. However, Master, although I don't know much about atoms, you now have other people you can consult. Camus, Saul immediately thought of the soul body freeloading in his wizard tower. He stood up, preparing to find Camus for a chat, but while walking on the stairs, he suddenly encountered Agu coming over. Master, Kismet has awakened and is making a fuss about wanting to see you. Saul's steps paused as he decided to go see Kismet and find out how this guy had fallen into the hands of fourth-rank wizard Ophelia. Although Kismet had been brought back to the wizard tower to recuperate, to prevent him from secretly causing trouble, Saul had several people take turns watching him. So when Saul came to the first floor, Kismet was sitting innocently in a chair, surrounded by dozens of little algae barring their teeth at him. As soon as he saw Saul, he raised his hand to complain. "My master, can you explain to this little guy that he and I are now colleagues of sorts, so he shouldn't be so wary of me?" "I'm the one who told it to watch you." Saul walked forward. Steward Hope, standing by the door, immediately brought over a chair so Saul could sit facing Kismet. "What did you do with Lord Lady? Clark wasn't dead before." Kismet still looked very thin, but his spirit had mostly recovered. He chuckled lightly. Lady Ophelia initially didn't care who became the next fourth-rank wizard, but I secretly convinced her to turn and support the Glare family instead. So naturally, she doesn't want Clark to make a comeback and disrupt her plans with the Glare family. As for Clark, being a third-rank wizard, he naturally wasn't easily completely killed. I know him quite well and guessed he might have hidden part of his soul in dreams to achieve rebirth. So after leaving Old Days Manor, I deliberately revealed to Ophelia that I was going to the Wind Chime Tree House, and she indeed followed me there. Saul said sarcastically, but at the same time, she knew you were openly using her, which is why she almost drained your blood to eliminate Clark's remnant soul. Kismet shrugged. For Master, I'm willing to sacrifice myself. Saul leaned back, quite disgusted. You used a fourth-rank wizard's hand to completely eliminate Clark's possibility of resurrection. Do you know who killed Clark? The smile on Kismet's face slightly restrained. Yes, and he probably didn't hide it from you either. Obviously, Kismet also knew who killed Clark. Did you plan this together? Although we didn't, we both had reasons to kill him, so when we met halfway, we chose to cooperate. Saul was silent for a moment, then suddenly asked another question. That storm eye, was it really forged by him? Kismet nodded, quite bold. I don't know how he managed to bring that thing from the far north across half the continent. Black tide brought back from outside, the sighing wall could simulate storm eye aura. The abyss might indeed emerge from the borderland. In that case, even becoming a third-rank wizard, he would be the first to face storm eyes and anchor points that could appear at any time. This storm eye was fake, but that didn't mean storm eyes wouldn't appear. One of Saul's prophetic dreams had now come true, Clark losing his sight. The only difference was that Clark didn't become a giant, but died in the joint effort of Gorsa and Kismet. Saul had basically figured out everything that happened at Old Days Manor. Then rest well. Once your body recovers, leave here. Saul stood up, preparing to leave. But Kismet suddenly called out to him, My dear younger brother Master, don't you want to know why I ran here to find you despite being severely injured? For free treatment. Kismet looked aggrieved. I'm not that useless. Then he said seriously, Actually, I came to tell you that the Borderland now has an open third-rank wizard position. Please make sure to seize this opportunity and complete all advancement preparations within 1 year. 1 year? Why did both Kismet and Gorsa give Saul the same time frame? Had they really not planned this beforehand? However, Kismet's condition was somewhat different. He wanted Saul to be prepared. Kismet continued, Firefly Lord Herbert actually depends on the tribunal, while Wind Sprite Payer belongs to Sky City Lord Ophelia, and Clark had already allied with the Stargate Council. Now that the Stargate Council lacks a representative in the Borderland, they'll naturally nominate candidates. If nothing unexpected happens, you'll definitely be one of them. However, I think even if Gorsa can convince the Glare family to fully recommend you, another faction of the Stargate Council will definitely select their candidate. So, in the next year or two, you'll inevitably experience a joint assessment from the Stargate Council and Borderland. If the Stargate Council directly sends a third-rank wizard over, wouldn't I be directly disqualified? No, even in the Stargate Council, third-rank wizards aren't white mushrooms you can find everywhere. Moreover, third-rank wizards in the Borderland face much greater restrictions than those outside. Ordinary, third-rank wizards wouldn't station themselves in the Borderland long-term for the resources here. If it were before, Saul might not have understood the Borderland's restrictions on third ranks. But after learning about third-rank wizards' methods of casting large-scale magic, he understood it was the Borderland's pollution that made other third ranks hesitant. Only second-rank wizards who hadn't yet advanced to third rank would be willing to risk coming here for advancement. So candidates would only be second-rank wizards like me. Heh, Certainly not wizards like you who just advanced to second rank. It would definitely be veteran wizards who have been stuck at second rank for many years, but haven't found the method to open their door. The reward from the Stargate Council and Borderland for those who stand out in the selection is helping them prepare all resources for opening their door and assisting them in completing their first door opening. Clap. Kismet brought his hands together. So next, please work hard to complete advancement preparations, master, and become a true candidate in the selection. This way you can obtain abundant resources and successfully advance. I see. Master Gorsa had told Saul to become third rank within a year, though at that time he probably didn't know there would be other candidates. What will the selection be like? Kismet spread his hands. I really don't know this. After all, the last time the Borderland had a third-rank vacancy was decades ago, and I wasn't here then. Saul wasn't worried about the selection itself, but he didn't know if this selection would be time-consuming and energy-draining, instead delaying his progress toward advancing to third rank within a year. However, since the Borderland must maintain 3 third ranks, the Stargate Council probably wouldn't waste time. I understand, Saul nodded. Do you have any other news to tell me? No more. Then let me ask you a question. Of course, Master, please. You were second rank decades ago, right? Yes, Tilda. How long have you been second rank? The light, floating smile on Kismet's face disappeared. He looked at Saul in silence. Almost a minute passed before he said quietly, a very long time. Chapter 646, Passing Grade. Kismet never revealed what specific connection existed between him and the Death Wizard diary. But Saul could see that many of his actions were related to the diary. It was just that from his inscrutable attitude, Saul couldn't judge what role he actually played in it all. Was his constant stirring up storms in various places to collect diary pages voluntary or forced? Was it helplessness, or did he enjoy it? But today, Saul suddenly sensed from Kismet's lost smile a trace of despair hidden beneath his changeable masks. He didn't know if it was his imagination, because Kismet quickly put on a smiling face again. Since I've already done so much for Master, don't keep me locked up here anymore. Kismet raised 2 index fingers, gently swaying them. At least let me appreciate the scenery here. Saul dragged out the sound while thinking. 5 minutes later. Strong wind blew against Kismet's face, turning his silver hair into a slick-back style, and whatever melancholy temperament he had was blown into an idiotic look. Kismet still sat in the original chair, still surrounded by little algae barring their teeth at him. This isn't the scenery I wanted to appreciate. Saul had brought Kismet to the circular platform at the tower top. Perhaps because winter was approaching, today's wind was particularly strong. As soon as they came up, it made their robes flutter loudly. Although Kismet had just played the victim, Saul didn't want to let him move freely in his wizard tower. The scenery here is quite nice. Fine. Kismet accepted his fate, then ignored the little algae beside him, rolled directly from the chair to the ground, put his hands behind his head, and lay flat on the ground, looking completely resigned to lying flat. The giant bird nearby suddenly stretched its wings, and a pale yellow feather fell from its body, blown by the wind onto Kismet's face. He didn't find it embarrassing either, taking off the feather that almost covered his entire face with interest, continuously spinning it with his fingers. Dear younger brother Master, what's the name of this mutated big bird? The pale yellow giant bird was borrowed from Peyer, and Saul had never thought about naming it. No name. Seeing Saul didn't answer, Kismet suggested with a smile, how about calling it Diu Diu? Saul frowned. Whether it was Diu meaning embarrassment or Diu meaning loss, neither seemed appropriate. Whatever, continue looking at the scenery. I have things to do. Don't do anything unnecessary or I'll throw you out if I find out. Yes, sir. Kismet had originally wanted to stick the feather in his hair, but smelling a faint bird droppings odor, he wrinkled his mouth in disgust, flicked the feather away with his hand, and cast several cleaning spells. Sigh, I've been busy for so long, can't do what I want to do, but now I can finally rest a bit. Saul had already turned to leave, but at the doorway he couldn't help but turn back and ask, "What do you want to do?" Kismet turned his head sideways, raised his hand to point at the sky, and said to Saul, "Me. I want to go to the stars." Yes. Leaving behind the incomprehensible Kismet, Saul came to the first basement level to consult Camus about atoms. Camus was still the same as before, welcoming any academic discussions from Saul. However, even though she was a third-rank wizard, her understanding of atoms was limited. The several commonly accepted atomic model theories she proposed were all different from Saul's physics knowledge of atoms. Of course, Saul couldn't confirm that atoms in this world had the same structure as those in his original world. Although third-rank wizards could already conduct experiments and applications based on atomic properties, they didn't have a very clear understanding of atomic microscopic structures. If I substitute the structure of physical atoms for verification, would I get correct results? Saul currently had one experiment ongoing that required changing material properties. That was the black tide pollution inertization formula that Senior Byron was currently tackling. However, using atomic changes to alter elemental properties was still too early. After all, Saul didn't even understand atomic structure clearly yet. Moreover, black tide pollution itself wasn't just an elemental problem, but also involved more pollution that acted on spiritual bodies. Just solving elemental and atomic problems wouldn't complete the inertization experiment. Senior really chose quite a difficult topic for himself. Saul rubbed his chin, suddenly having a new association. If elemental particles are composed of atoms, then what is pollution, which has a different manifestation form from elemental particles? After learning theoretical knowledge from Camus, Saul prepared to go to Byron's place for practical testing. Just the initial experimental design phase alone had taken them half a month. Even with Camus providing guidance, they hadn't improved their progress much. During one day in this half-month, Kismet left without saying goodbye. Like a well-fed stray cat, he ran off without even greeting anyone. Of course, being exposed to wind and sun at Saul's place wasn't very comfortable for him either. Half a month later, Pear, who hadn't been seen since leaving Old Days Manor, finally appeared. As soon as she arrived, in the small room on the 4th floor of the Wizard Tower, she told Saul about him becoming a candidate for the third-rank position in the Borderland. The third candidate. The news Saul got from Kismet was about 2 candidates, but unexpectedly at Pear's place, there was another one. Yes, this is already the result of our hard efforts. Fortunately, you have a mentor with considerable reputation who's connected to the Glare family, and we also notified Gorsa in the far north, who agreed to let you become a candidate. It's just that unexpectedly, the Glare family also sent out a candidate named Corey, who specializes in light attribute magic. Perhaps neither side could convince the other, so in the end they let both of you become candidates for fair competition. But this way, the Stargate Council chairman's side also put forward someone called Luke, who like you specializes in dark attribute magic. So it ended up being a total of 4 candidates. Actually, Pear wanted to complain that Gorsa had initially said to make Saul the next third rank, but in the end, he could only become one of the candidates. Typical case of ability not matching reputation. However, considering that he was Saul's mentor after all, she didn't feel it appropriate to gossip and swallowed her complaints. 3 is fine, doesn't matter. Although initially surprised, Saul quickly became accepting. Anyway, whether it was 2 or 3 people, there would be competition, so let's see who's stronger. If it were a life-and-death battle, Saul really had some confidence. Even among the best second-rank wizards, it would be hard to escape his consciousness space siege. Thinking this way, Saul felt somewhat eager to try. "How will the winner be selected?" he asked Peyer. Peyer looked at the confident Saul, couldn't help but kiss the corner of his mouth, and said with a smile, "Although the selection conditions haven't been determined yet, ultimately the Firefly Lord, and a third rank from the Stargate Council will jointly help the winner push open the door within their body. This requires that the candidate must rely on their own power to push open at least a tiny crack in the door within their body." Chapter 647, High Altitude. Peyer stayed at the Purity Wizard Tower for one night and prepared to leave the next morning. To resist Clark's nightmare erosion, she had transformed into an old witch for a long time. Although during this period the fake wind sprite maintained the prestige of the cliff and control over subordinates, it was still different from when she was there herself. Peyer was very busy every day now, not only sorting out the complex internal forces, but also continuing to restore her own strength. So when she came to find Saul, she originally just wanted to tell him about the candidate matter and return, but still couldn't resist and stayed another night. When Peyer was preparing to leave through the window again, Saul grabbed her ankle and pulled her back. Peyer's face turned slightly red, but she didn't resist. However, after Saul called her back, he spoke about another matter. "By the way, you have something that's been kept with me all this time. Have you forgotten about it?" Speaking, Saul took out the Bezek magic mirror that Peyer had temporarily entrusted to his care from his storage device. Peyer raised her hand to cover her mouth. "I really forgot." Looking at the magic mirror that should have been her most important treasure, she felt both amused and helpless inside. This mirror contained a strand of her consciousness, a backup plan in case she was completely devoured by Clark and died. But Clark had been dead for so long, yet she had never remembered to retrieve the mirror. Peyer shook her head with a smile and reached out to take the mirror back. However, just as her fingers were about to touch the Bezek magic mirror, Peyer suddenly felt a strong sense of unease rise in her heart. This unease appeared without warning, but Peyer took it very seriously. Peyer had Sprite bloodline, and like many races with naturally strong mental power, Sprites valued intuition greatly. So when this strong unease arose, Peyer immediately withdrew her hand. "What's wrong?" Seeing Peyer's reaction, Saul knew something must have happened and quickly asked. I suddenly remembered that now isn't the time to take the magic mirror back. Please continue to help me keep it safe." Peyer hadn't yet figured out the source of her unease or what consequences it might mean. She was just casually answering Saul's question. Saul naturally saw that Peyer was hiding something, but he didn't press further. Instead, he readily returned Peyer's Bezek magic mirror to his storage device. "Then I'll keep it here for now. If you need it, you can come get it any time." Peyer nodded and flew away from the window, absent-mindedly. This time Saul didn't hold her back. Watching Peyer's figure gradually flying higher and farther away, Saul was also thinking about why she had suddenly changed expressions. She looked a bit panicked just now. Could she have discovered some dangerous matter that hasn't been resolved yet? But since Ophelia had already intervened, Clark was definitely dead beyond any doubt, so the threat to Peyer should have dissipated. Then what else could make Peyer show such uneasy eyes? If it's not nightmares, could it be black tide pollution? Since the storm eye at Old Days Manor was identified as fake, Peyer and Herbert had once again sent people out to search for storm eyes. But there had been no news for half a month. Everyone began to suspect whether the storm eye information might be false news created by the mysterious person who killed Clark, just to lure Clark, or other third-rank wizards. However, Saul's prophetic dream was there, plus Gorse's urging for him to become third rank quickly, so Saul felt the Storm Eye threat hadn't disappeared. It was just temporarily lying dormant, waiting for the final opportunity to erupt. Perhaps Master wants me to advance to third rank within a year to also deal with the real Storm Eye that's about to come. Saul stood dazedly by the window, not moving for a long time. He thought again of his prophetic dream. In the dream, the giant bird chasing toward the starry sky very likely represented the wind sprite. He just wasn't clear whether it was the fake wind sprite or the real one. At this time, Peyer, whom Saul was worried about, had already left the vicinity of Rhine Lake. But she also wasn't flying toward the cliff. Her flight path was somewhat strange, initially zigzagging in a way that made it impossible to guess where she was going. Later, however, she flew higher and higher until she passed through the cloud layer and appeared in a windless domain, only then coming back to her senses. Looking at the boundless blue around her and the rolling sea of clouds beneath her feet, Peyer was stunned for a second. How did I get to such a high place? Wind Sprite Peyer specialized in wind attribute magic and was particularly good at flying, also enjoying the feeling of soaring in the sky. But she had never flown this high before. Above the clouds, what she felt was no longer the freedom of flight, but instead a sense of confinement from having nowhere to escape in such vast surroundings. Without time to think more, she quickly dove down through the cloud layer. When continuous mountain ranges appeared before her eyes, she finally had the real feeling of coming back to life. Thump, 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 thump. Her heart was beating fast. Peyer pressed her chest, trying to calm down. But before she had flown much farther, strange sounds reached her ears again. Rustle, rustle, rustle. At first Peyer thought it was wind sounds, but even when she flew close to the cliff where the surroundings no longer had strong winds due to the mountains blocking, the rustling sound scraping against her ears continued. Peyer had no choice but to use magical power to seal her hearing, finally making the sound disappear. Taking advantage of not being able to hear, Peyer examined her body once more. Ever since Saul had thoroughly cleansed the pollution from her body last time, her interior had become very clean, so clean that even after several months, she still hadn't contracted the distinctive pollution of the borderland. This sometimes made her wonder if she had already left the borderland. After a while, Peyer finished checking her physical condition and dispersed her magical power. Strangely, yet relievingly, the vague rustling had also disappeared. However, Peyer understood that this rustling sound might not have completely disappeared. In this place, one could never truly let down their guard. After Peyer left, Saul stood by the window watching her figure disappear at the horizon's edge before turning around. Peyer had suddenly become somewhat tense just now. Although she didn't say anything on the surface, Saul could feel her unease. So Saul had naturally taken back the Bezek magic mirror. Holding the magic mirror, Saul went to find Senior Byron. You said you once dreamed of the future, and part of it has already become reality. Byron heard about Saul's prophetic dream and didn't doubt its authenticity, but seriously began analyzing the information within. I believe the future isn't fixed. What you saw was very likely just one of multiple possible futures. This future, without human intervention, was very likely to become reality. But since you've already seen the future, then the future can potentially be changed. Having read many stories, Saul wasn't as relaxed as Byron. I'm just worried that sometimes we might do many things to avoid that future. But the result of doing too many things to avoid the future is the real reason behind that future. Chapter 648. Using dynamite to light cigarettes. If the future isn't what you want, you can't give up even if you persist until the last moment. Byron wasn't used to encouraging others. After saying this sentence, he directly took out his current research results. Instead of having time to think about these twists and turns, why not look at the inertization formula? You said that to change the characteristics of black tide pollution, we need to fundamentally change its structure. But I've tried several highly destructive experiments, and even when I can shatter the black tide, I can't change its characteristics. Since Saul had gradually established himself at second rank, Byron no longer excluded him from participating in the inertization formula research. Of course, this formula was really too difficult to crack, and one person could easily fall into mental dead ends. Saul's attention was immediately drawn to the experiment. If it's just purely destructive force, I'm afraid it can't cause damage to matter at the elemental particle level. Byron presented his current thinking, but as long as the destructive force is large enough, it should be possible to complete microscopic destruction. But even third-rank wizards can't do it. Byron nodded, so we still need to borrow external force. Saul's heart skipped a beat. He knew Senior Byron was always bold and didn't know what bizarre yet terrifying ideas he might have. What external force do you want to borrow? I haven't figured that out yet. Byron held the notes in his hand. You said in your prophecy that the borderland might suffer a devastating blow. Could such devastating force reach the reaction intensity needed for the inertization formula? You're using dynamite to light cigarettes. Although he felt Byron's idea was quite unreliable, Saul didn't stop Byron from thinking just because his own views differed. However, compared to Byron's violent dismantling approach, Saul thought more about how to work around the problem. Many seemingly powerful existences often had corresponding natural enemies that could instantly turn strength into weakness. But finding such natural enemies was very difficult. In the entire borderland, there was no place without pollution. Byron's experimental progress was stuck, while Saul's experiment simply hadn't begun. Because he had been unable to find a sufficient natural enemy to change the characteristics of black tide pollution. 3 days later, Saul suddenly received a letter. A letter sent from outside the borderland. The letter carrier was old friend Jiajiagu, who had originally wanted to go outside to stock up on goods, but at the entrance to Hanging Hands Valley, he encountered a wizard who wanted to deliver a letter but didn't dare enter. Seeing that the recipient was Saul, Jiajiagu didn't bother with shopping and directly revealed his identity, took the letter from the other party, and hurried to deliver it to Saul. Saul received the letter, genuinely surprised. He just gave you the letter directly. Jiajiagu shrugged with a smile that told him he didn't dare come in. Saul used detection magic to simply check the letter. No problems. There weren't even any traces of magical power on it. It should just be an ordinary handwritten letter. Saul opened the outermost envelope sealed with wax. As the envelope opened, he saw the signature inside, and his eyes immediately curved up. However, he didn't continue opening the letter, but instead looked up at Jiajiagu and said, "It's a letter from my friend. Thank you very much." Saul took out some magic crystals from his storage device, wanting to give Jiajiagu some delivery fees. But Jiajiagu had no intention of taking money at all. He even looked somewhat unhappy. "Oh, I help you get a letter and you give me money. Do you really consider me your friend or not?" Saul was stunned. Although his relationship with Jiajiagu was good and they had been cooperating for over a year, Jiajiagu had never called himself his friend before. Normally, Saul would take this as Jiajiagu showing goodwill toward him, but recently he was quite tense due to Pear's reaction and his thoughts about the prophetic dream. This made his first reaction to check whether Jiajiagu had been polluted. So Saul wasn't in a hurry to go back and read the letter. He tucked the envelope into his chest and placed one hand on Jiajiagu's shoulder. "Then let me, as your friend, help you check whether the pollution on your body has recurred. This is a friend's concern. You can't refuse me, right? Sure, sure, that's what friends do. Jiajiagu alternately bounced on his left and right legs twice, looking very happy with Saul's response. Looking at the excited Jiajiagu, Saul again confirmed his suspicions. So he immediately penetrated Jiajiagu's body with his mental power. The latter showed not a trace of resistance, allowing Saul to explore everything about him. However, after careful examination, Saul found that Jiajiagu's interior was frighteningly clean. The last time Saul had examined Jiajiagu, he still had some black-tide pollution in his body. Even the substitute puppet Saul made couldn't completely absorb the erosion from the backpack. But this time it was truly completely clean. Saul also checked the puppet cushioned on Jiajiagu's back. The puppet had now turned somewhat blackish-gray. This meant it was continuously operating, preventing the backpack from directly polluting Jiajiagu. The puppet has no problems, the backpack hasn't changed, so the problem still lies with Jiajiagu himself. Saul's right hand had been on Jiajiagu for quite a while, but Jiajiagu showed no impatience, his face still full of excitement. Saul glanced at Jiajiagu. He looks very agitated. Thinking about the other party's behavior, Saul pressed his lips together and suddenly sent his mental power into Jiajiagu's spiritual body. This was a more in-depth examination and also a test. The spiritual body was as important and fragile as the brain for wizards or creatures with magical power. For an outsider, even a good friend or relative, wanting to examine someone's spiritual body was equivalent to asking, "May I lift off your skull?" But Jiajiagu in front of him still looked at Saul with excitement and joy, as if certain he wouldn't harm him. Too much of a performance. Saul's heart sank, and regardless of consequences, he really covered the other party's spiritual body with his mental power. Of course, his movements were very careful and cautious. He didn't really want to harm Jiajiagu. But just as his mental power touched Jiajiagu's spiritual body, a familiar feeling suddenly came from the other party. Then, through his mental power, Saul saw a semi-transparent eye that appeared on Jiajiagu's spiritual body. "Saul, who are you?" Saul genuinely wanted to ask this question. It wasn't that he hadn't seen this eye before, but that he had just seen this eye, just not on Jiajiagu. Although the eye on Jiajiagu's spiritual body was semi-transparent, in Saul's mental power perception, it still had 7 colored pupils. Clearly the last time he saw this eye was on the back of Brando's head. How had it now appeared in Jiajiagu's spiritual body? "Jiajiagu, have you seen Brando recently?" Saul asked calmly. "Yes, I met Wizard Brando outside your mushroom forest last time." Jiajiagu spoke quite clearly, not seeming to be controlled by anyone. "Did you see anything like an eye on his body?" Jiajiagu thought carefully. "No, but that day I suddenly felt that Wizard Brando was a particularly good person." "Why?" "Because he's also your friend." Chapter 649, Letter from an Old Friend. Jiajiagu had indeed been influenced by Brando. And Brando had indeed been influenced by Saul's consciousness space. However, judging from Jiajiagu's behavior, apart from having an extra eye with colored pupils in his spiritual body, and suddenly becoming unusually enthusiastic towards Saul, there seemed to be no harm. Even his body had lost the previously incurable black-tide pollution. Saul's intuition told him that this suddenly appearing colored eye was one of those constantly flickering stars on the outermost edge of his consciousness space. Although he had no concrete evidence, the stars in his consciousness space had always existed, appearing in his spiritual body even earlier than the dead wizard's diary. When these star-incarnated pupils transferred to others, they could actually help other people avoid black-tide pollution. Wasn't this ability a bit too strong? What exactly are these star eyes? If they've really been staying in my consciousness body all along, could they be related to my unobservable past? Saul's transmigration process was a mystery, and having seen what happened to the nightmare butterfly and Clark, even Saul himself felt fearful about his own past. Since it was related to crossing worlds, his past very likely involved spatial knowledge. And spatial knowledge generally required fourth-rank wizards to master. Saul tried to communicate with the pupil that appeared on Jiaji Agu's spiritual body, wanting to recall this pupil. However, although this pupil blinked cutely at Saul, it had no intention of following his commands. After several unsuccessful attempts, and to avoid harming Jiaji Agu, Saul had to withdraw his mental power. "How is it I don't have any problems, right?" Jiaji Agu quickly asked. Although he wasn't worried that Saul would harm him, he still cared about his own health. "Currently, there don't seem to be any problems. The pollution in your body has even decreased significantly." Jiaji Agu patted his belly and laughed. "Ha ha, Dr. Saul is indeed amazing. With your abilities, you'll surely conquer all the wizards and magical creatures in the borderlands sooner or later." Saul forced a smile. "I'm also constantly learning." Conquer. If the star eyes could spread from person to person as easily as Brando infected Jiaji Agu, then Saul might really be able to conquer the residents of the borderland. Saul still wasn't sure whether the colored eye on Brando had transferred to Jiaji Agu or been copied to Jiaji Agu. If it was the latter, well, Saul had no way to solve the star eye problem anyway. Moreover, Saul believed that while he still couldn't control those eyes on the periphery of his consciousness space, rashly studying these eyes was actually very dangerous. Saul exhaled and again thanked Jiaji Agu for specially delivering the letter. "If you encounter Brando sometime, please bring him along when you visit. I want to observe the differences in your physical conditions to judge the effects of my healing techniques." "No problem. It's just that Brando has been hiding somewhere doing research lately. We might have to wait until he comes out before we can meet him." Saul nodded. Brando had new ideas when he left last time. He might be in seclusion researching now. Who knew if the star eye on Brando would make him smarter, in addition to increasing his friendliness towards Saul. After Jiaji Agu left, Saul returned to the wizard tower with worries and continued opening the letter. However, the letter's contents soon made him smile and relax considerably. To a certain abnormally fast-progressing freak. Some days ago, Lord Gorsa departed from the Sighing Wall toward Escaper, passing through Kema. I followed Grand Duke Kira to receive his lordship together and learned you had already reached second rank. If I had known this news 2 days earlier, I would definitely have lost my mental balance and been unable to advance to true wizard. Just as I adjusted my mindset, Lord Gorsa said you had already started preparing to assault third rank. I really wish you could have seen Grand Duke Kira's expression then. I think if possible, she would definitely first chop down his lordship in front of her, then run to the borderland to chop you down. How do I know? Because I was thinking the same thing. Well, congratulations anyway. I once thought about going to the borderland to find you after becoming a true wizard, but the current me would only drag you down if I went there. So I've decided to continue staying by Grand Duke Kira's side to study. Grand Duke Kira specializes in metal attribute magic. Although it's completely different from my field of study, she has many things worth learning in meditation and magical applications. I'm currently researching new radiation, but this radiation isn't aimed at harming or killing people. My current research has achieved some results, but the experiments are still missing some key elements. Since you're in the borderland, could you have someone bring me some magical creatures from there? It would be even better if they were polluted. I heard the pollution there is very severe, and I want to see if my new research can handle it. If I achieve new results through this research, I'll send you a copy." The signature was naturally Kelly. Above the signature was also a drawing of a little person trying hard to roll their eyes. After reading the letter, Saul smiled and shook his head, casually burning the letter. Deliberately saying Master Gorsa departed from the sighing wall, isn't that a bit intentional? Kelly probably wanted to convey to Saul that Gorsa had also deliberately told them this, secretly notifying Saul that the Tower Master might have run off somewhere to cause trouble again. But Kelly didn't know that Gorsa had just finished stirring up trouble at his place. However, why did Kelly suddenly want polluted magical creatures? The borderland would never lack magical creatures polluted by the black tide. But how could Saul send them to Kelly? Saul slowly wandered back to the wizard tower and happened to see the magic wolf leisurely sunbathing with nothing to do. Recently, Saul used the giant bird Diu for travel, so the magic wolf was basically unemployed. But with Marsh responsible for its meals, it had been growing nicely lately. Saul looked at the magic wolf, opening its mouth wide in a yawn, and gradually stopped walking. Sending letters is very difficult, and I don't have anyone I can command, or I could let the letter walk there itself. Han-achoo. The magic wolf's original yawn suddenly turned into a sneeze. It shook its fur all over, got up from the ground in confusion, and happened to meet Saul's gaze. For some reason, a chill ran through the magic wolf's heart. After having Steward Hope retrain the magic wolf and teach it to recognize roads, Saul finally put a special collar around the magic wolf's neck. The positioning image on it would always point toward Kema's capital. The text on the collar would naturally have Kema's soldiers bring Kelly out. 3 days later, the magic wolf set off with a letter containing no secret information. The only worry now was whether the magic wolf would be killed by someone along the way. Saul had left his mental power on the magic wolf, so ordinary people shouldn't touch it. The once mighty magic wolf now left with frequent backward glances, its wolf life henceforth racing toward an unknown direction. Chapter 650, Light in the Chaos Realm. Failed again. Saul once more awakened from deep meditation. Today he had again attempted to capture his fate lines. However, after trying 4 or 5 times in succession, he still couldn't grasp that fate line again, nor could he know whether his future had changed. His previous fate had shown him rushing fearlessly toward the surging black tide, but now with Clark dead and Pear having become his person, would the future change because of this? Or were all the things he had done before the very causes that led to the future occurring? Because observing fate lines consumed a large amount of Saul's mental power, he immediately felt a wave of fatigue upon recovering from deep meditation. This kind of meditation was different from his usual way of using meditation to replace rest. Not only did it not restore mental power, it also increased consumption, making one's spirit extremely weary. Saul simply didn't force himself to stay up. He directly leaned back and fell onto the mushroom bed, sleeping soundly. There, he saw himself standing in the center of a huge magic formation. Many people surrounded the formation. There were Pear and Firefly Lord Herbert. There were Senior Byron and Brando. And some low-rank wizards he had seen before. Even farther away were some strangers. Most people's faces showed awe and envy. Directly across from Saul stood 2 black shadows. One shadow was tall, one short. From their silhouettes they appeared to be a man and woman. But Saul couldn't see their specific appearances clearly, only sensing that they seemed very unhappy. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared before Saul. This person had golden electric light flashing all over their body. The electric light also obscured their features. Saul could only see thin, bloodless lips opening and closing, while his ears buzzed, hearing nothing but noise. Until finally, his ears seemed suddenly cleared by someone, and he finally heard the man in front speak the last word. Door. However, as this word fell, Saul suddenly heard the sound of huge waves behind him. He spun around sharply and saw black giant waves, as tall as small mountains crashing down from overhead. Saul turned to flee. As far as he could see, everyone showed expressions of terror. Just as Saul ran half a step, he was mercilessly swallowed by the black, icy seawater. The feeling of suffocation instantly spread from his nasal cavity to his lungs. Saul seemed to forget he was a wizard and could only desperately paddle with his limbs. He was carried by the waves, crashing into tree trunks and rocks several times before finally managing to poke his head above the Black Sea surface. The seawater carried him up and down. At this time, apart from the constantly rising waves around him, Saul couldn't see a single person. Screech! A clear cry. The pale yellow giant bird flew down from high altitude. The bird's long tentacles reached into the black seawater and scooped out Saul. However, just as the tentacles pulled Saul from the black seawater, they began to burn. At the last moment, Saul desperately climbed onto Diu's back, but the flames followed close behind. They became a ball of black flame in the air. Saul suddenly opened his eyes and found himself still lying on the mushroom bed, while the sweat on his body had actually soaked through his undershirt. He cleaned himself up and ran down from the 4th floor. Senior Byron was still researching on the 3rd floor, with the laboratory lights still on. The steward and other consciousness bodies weren't in the tower, busy with who knows what. As for Camus on the 1st basement level, Saul thought about it and finally returned to his bedroom. But after returning to his bedroom, he didn't continue resting. Instead, he took out the Chaos Realm compass. Although it hadn't been a month since he last visited his little apprentice Noah, Saul urgently wanted to see the Chaos Realm that had once been destroyed by the Black Tide because of his recent dream. The pointer on the compass spun rapidly, causing Saul's senses to also begin spinning. After brief dizziness, Saul's vision went black, and he found himself standing on a black desert. It was already dark, with no moonlight overhead. The length of a day in the Chaos Realm was the same as in the wizard world. The Chaos Realm should belong to a world side of the main world, sharing the same sun and moon with the wizard world. It's just that tonight's moonlight didn't seem to reach this place. Everything around was pitch black, and Saul could only explore his surroundings through mental power. There was almost no pollution here, nor any active magical power. Of course, Saul had never discovered any life here other than monsters. He wasn't clear whether intelligent species still existed in this world that had once been swept by the black tide. Having Noah live here, besides maintaining Noah's life, was also to have him help explore this world. Saul wanted to know what exactly had happened to the Chaos Realm. What was it like originally? Why had it become like this? Most importantly, Saul wanted to know how the black tide appeared, and how it became the current lifeless black powder with no pollution ability covering the ground. Saul's mental power quickly found the small house not far away. However, there were no mental power fluctuations from Noah inside the house. Saul spread his mental power to its maximum range, but still didn't discover any trace of Noah. After dark, the black desert becomes more dangerous, and monsters hidden beneath the sand are harder to detect. Why isn't Noah home? Thinking his little apprentice might have encountered some trouble, Saul frowned slightly and raised his hand to release a huge fireball toward the sky. The sphere burning with red flames rose into the sky. Although it couldn't bring light to the earth like a real sun, it could let life on the nearby land sense this bit of crimson. Soon Saul saw a small point of light to his left. That was the small fireball Noah had finally learned with great difficulty. Due to poor magical aptitude, Noah didn't have any so-called specialization element. He learned whichever was simple, focusing on practicality. Coming to the Chaos Realm, the first zero-rank magic Noah learned was a small fireball. At the same time, because this world had no active elemental particles, magic received very little interference after being cast, resulting in zero-rank magic having longer attack range and duration in this world. In this world, Noah was the only one who could cast magic. The moment Saul saw the small fireball, his entire body shot up from the ground, drawing a precise parabola in the air before landing where the small fireball had been launched. While descending, Saul unceremoniously cast Electric Light Shield, his entire body surrounded by rings of lightning halos, like the moon descending from heaven to earth. If someone who saw Saul at this moment were to write memoirs in the future, they would definitely describe Saul in their book as a god descending from heaven. He guided this hopeless world onto another path of revival and gave life in this place, unable to live properly or die peacefully, a chance to change their fate. But at this moment, Scorpion, born in the Dark Age, had received no education. Standing beside Noah, he looked up in a daze at the divine figure, surrounded by golden electric arcs with a cloak fluttering behind him. Looking at the only point of light in the dark world, only two words came to his mind. Holy shit. Chapter 651, God. Noah was extremely happy to see Saul. If it weren't for the fact that he and a boy with leather wrapped around his waist were standing on tiptoes squeezed together on a stone spike, he probably would have jumped up with joy. Seeing Saul about to land, Noah quickly called out a warning, "Master, be careful. There's a monster underground." Saul's figure came to an abrupt stop 3 meters above the ground. He scanned the ground, but no attacks appeared. He looked at Noah and found him standing with a very thin boy on a 1-meter stone spike, with what appeared to be whip marks around the stone. The stone looked large but wasn't solid. All around, especially the lower end near the ground, there were many deep, long grooves. Several grooves had already extended thin cracks. Obviously, the stone couldn't support them much longer and would split apart. Saul's mental power spread along the stone down underground. At first he found nothing. His mental power could only sense soil, rocks, and some dried plant root systems. However, comparing the marks on the stone, his mental power immediately locked onto that dried plant. A black blade appeared from his right side, quickly transforming into an indiscernible black gleam that drilled underground. With a splurt sound, the black blade left a thin crack in the ground. After a while, the ground began to tremble. The two people standing on the stone swayed precariously. Then a withered yellow plant suddenly burst from the crack in the ground, whistling as it tried to attack Saul. However, Saul's position was too high, and the plant that had lost its front half couldn't reach him at all. The angry plant then lashed violently toward the two people on the stone, but a transparent barrier appeared around Noah, blocking the withered plant strikes. That was an armor spell scroll Saul had prepared for Noah. It could be activated with just a bit of mental power and a magic crystal. Unable to strike the two people, the plant could only futilely leave another deep mark on the stone. With its attack unsuccessful, the plant swayed on the ground like an arm full of unwillingness. Saul now clearly saw the entire plant structure and condensed another black blade. This time the black blade shot forward swiftly, starting from the top of the plant that hadn't had time to retract underground, splitting the entire dried plant in half from top to bottom, from head to root. The black blade followed the dried plant's meridians deep into the soil, not dissipating until it had cut through the entire plant's main root system. In Noah's eyes, The terrifying plant monster that had just been so formidable now lay collapsed on both sides like a skinned snake, soft on the ground. He and the boy beside him both looked at Saul with worship. If Scorpion had thought Saul looked like a divine being descending when he first saw him, particularly handsome, then now the other party had demonstrated a kind of powerful strength that both awed and attracted him. He must be the god great-grandfather spoke of, right? Seeing his master appear and easily eliminate the monster that had troubled him for half the day, Noah looked at Saul with eyes constantly sparkling with little stars. He never expected Saul to appear today, when it hadn't even been half a month since his last visit. Originally, his magic crystals had scattered all over the ground when he was escaping with the boy, and all he held was a scroll that could only activate one armor spell. But that plant-like monster kept chasing them relentlessly. Even though it could never break through the armor spell's defense, it didn't leave. In fact, the armor spell's time limit really couldn't last much longer. Just as Noah was starting to think about how to fight the monster after the armor spell failed, Saul's fireball suddenly shot up into the sky. Noah was immediately overjoyed, and not caring about saving some magic power for defense, directly cast his most skilled small fireball. This also saved their lives. Saul easily killed the monster but didn't relax his vigilance. He swept the soil around the monster with his mental power, including near its root system. Only after finding no more mental power fluctuations did he slowly land on the ground. In the Chaos realm, there was no magic power to replenish, so he had to be careful about consumption when casting spells normally. "It's fine now." Hearing Saul's voice, Noah pulled the thin little boy and prepared to jump down from the big stone. Just as they were about to jump, they heard two crack sounds, and the 1-meter-tall big stone shattered into countless pieces. Noah and Scorpion, who were staring intently at Saul, one fell forward and one leaned backward, both about to hit the ground. Little Algae immediately appeared to catch Noah, who almost fell face first, but it didn't help the unfamiliar little boy. The little boy seemed about to fall head first, but suddenly twisted his waist in midair. Something hand-like emerged from beneath the leather around his waist, pressed against the ground, and actually supported the boy's body, preventing him from falling on the sharp stone fragments. This child indeed has problems. Saul wasn't surprised and just watched quietly. The boy had what appeared to be a charred black arm growing from his tailbone area, connected to a palm with only 3 fingers. Each finger was short and had no joints. When Saul had just used his mental power to check the safety around the two, he had discovered the little boy's mental power was somewhat abnormal. It wasn't to the degree of pollution, but it was also different from normal people. His mental power was even comparable to Noah, who had taken enhancement drugs twice. Yet such a boy had been playing the role of someone who needed protection in front of Noah. Watching little Algae bring Noah to his side, Saul asked Noah, "Who is he?" Noah looked curiously at the deformed arm beneath the boy, and hearing Saul's question, quickly answered truthfully. "He says his name is Scorpion or Blood, something like that pronunciation. We don't speak the same language. I just saw him digging holes in the ground looking for food. I thought it was rare to meet a living person, so I went to talk to him. But after just asking 2 questions, we were chased by a monster that suddenly burst from the ground. He kept running away. I didn't expect he had such abilities." Noah obviously saw that Scorpion was hiding his strength, but because Saul appeared, he wasn't angry. Instead, he immediately entered wizard perspective, re-examining the boy before him with a research mindset. Saul suddenly raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Then, a white light emerged from Scorpion's head and drilled into Saul's forehead. "Master, what are you doing?" Noah asked in amazement. "First-rank magic, comprehend languages. You can learn it once your internal magic power accumulates to 50 joules. 50 joules. Noah's mouth gaped wide. In this world, where there was no way to absorb elemental particles through meditation, the number 50 was simply despairing to him. Saul wasn't just painting pie-in-the-sky dreams for Noah. Although this world had entered the apocalypse due to black tide pollution, a world's resources were no joke. As long as the right methods were found, even the black powder in the soil could potentially become rare resources. After reassuring his little apprentice, Saul looked again at the boy who had been stunned speechless by the white light just now. Saul's brain worked rapidly, organizing the new knowledge he had gained, then spoke. "Your name is Scorpion." At first, when Scorpion saw the white light appear above his head, he thought Saul was going to kill him too. Although his hidden arm was very powerful, that was only against ordinary monsters. This terrifying man before him could kill the withered ghost vine with one strike. But after discovering that Saul hadn't harmed him and even spoke their language, Scorpion finally realized what kind of existence he had encountered. Saul didn't know what the dark, thin boy across from him was thinking. He just watched in amazement as Scorpion suddenly ignored the stone fragments all over the ground, prostrated himself on the ground, turned his head to the right side with his left cheek against the ground, spread his limbs on the ground, and arranged his entire body into a big character shape. "God, please save Scorpion. Scorpion is willing to become your slave." So, Noah. Chapter 652, Demon Seeding, Vaccine. Noah didn't know why Scorpion had suddenly prostrated himself on the ground. However, after Saul also cast comprehend languages on him, he finally understood that Scorpion had actually taken Saul for a god. In the wizard world, some backward places or remote areas of continents also had people who worshipped gods. However, most people still revered wizards above all. The more powerful the wizard forces in a place, the more shameful it was considered to believe in gods. This was even more so in the borderland. Even if those dwarves or barbarians were very powerful, humans who were wizard slaves would still despise them. So Noah initially thought Saul would refuse and correct Scorpion's form of address. However, Saul acquiesced to it. Noah's eyes widened slightly. Watching Scorpion become increasingly respectful towards Saul and earnestly answer questions, a thought suddenly arose in his mind. Saul had little Algae split off a clone to pull Noah on one side and carry Scorpion on the other, while he cast flight magic to return to Noah's cottage at maximum speed. After returning to the cottage, Saul didn't let Scorpion enter the house but began questioning him directly on the small hillside outside. "Where did you come from? What are you here to do?" After being put down by little Algae, Scorpion wanted to prostrate himself again, but Saul grabbed his neck and lifted him up. "I don't like you talking while lying on the ground. Just stand and answer." Scorpion hesitated somewhat, but great-grandfather said to show the greatest respect to gods. "Did your great-grandfather tell you that gods dislike disobedient believers?" Scorpion was stunned. It took him a while to understand what believers meant, but he still compromised and stopped trying to prostrate himself. "I come from my tribe, right at the edge of this Black Death Plain." Scorpion said his father had died while out looking for food, and after his mother married another man in the tribe, since no one was willing to raise him, he was forced to come of age. Adults had to hunt a monster outside the tribe and bring it back, or they wouldn't qualify to start a family in their original tribe. But Scorpion's abilities weren't powerful, and for various reasons, people in the tribe hadn't helped him complete the hunt. So he had originally wanted to venture slightly deeper into the Black Death Plain to set traps and catch a gold-eating rat, but unexpectedly went too deep, attracted a withered ghost vine, and was finally saved by Noah, who was mapping the area. Noah also hadn't expected that the Black Desert, which had been quiet enough to drive people mad, was actually so dangerous. Saul told Noah not to speak and maintain his persona. Where is your tribe? Scorpion looked around. Can't see clearly now. When dawn comes, I'll be able to see clearly. My tribe is between two big mountains. It takes 12 days and nights to walk here. Scorpion raised both hands. When his fingers weren't enough, he also counted the deformed hand at his tailbone. He almost couldn't count high enough. Saul continued asking, "How many people are in your tribe?" Scorpion directly shook his head. "Don't know many." His fingers couldn't count that high. "How many other places like your tribe are there?" "I know of 3, but we rarely interact. Normally we only have contact during breeding seasons." After asking Scorpion several more questions, Saul learned that people here basically all lived underground, surrounding the Black Death Plain where he was located. This Black Death Plain was dangerous, but it also had many monsters. Some weak monsters were the food source for most people. However, few people would enter the deepest part of the Black Death Plain, where Saul was, because people who entered either went mad or died. Finally, Saul asked about what interested him most, Scorpion's third hand. Scorpion didn't feel there was anything wrong with having such a hand. He just felt his hand was too weak. "Do all of you have hands growing here?" Scorpion felt the god before him didn't seem as omniscient as great-grandfather had said. He hugged his seemingly burned third hand. "You mean the demon limb? We all have them, but everyone's demon limb looks different. Some people have wings like birds, some have mouths like crocodiles. Every child must undergo demon seeding right after birth. Those who survive will have their own demon limb, and those who die get sold." "But what if you don't undergo demon seeding?" Saul asked. Scorpion looked somewhat surprised. He thought carefully and finally dug out a deep memory. "The only child I remember who didn't undergo demon seeding turned into a monster at age 5 and supposedly ate everyone in their entire tribe." According to Scorpion, people who didn't undergo demon seeding might turn into monsters at a few years old. Noah listened with great interest but kept restraining himself, not interrupting without Saul's permission. "Demon seeding, demon limbs, not demon seeding turns you into monsters." Saul crossed his arms, pinching his chin with one hand. "Somewhat like vaccinating newborn babies, but the vaccine here is quite harsh. It sounds like the survival rate for vaccination isn't very high, and not getting vaccinated means you can't last a few years. Should be related to the black powder that's everywhere in this world. Maybe the people of this world have been studying black powder for a long time. Their research results might help me and seniors' inertization formula." The result of the questioning was that Saul became more determined to explore this world in depth. Just not urgently now. Noah still needed time to grow, and he also needed to prepare for advancing to third rank. Moreover, after becoming third rank, exploring this chaos realm in depth should be safer. For now, he'd make simple contact with this world through Scorpion. Saul extended his hand toward the deformed arm Scorpion held in his embrace. "Let me take a look." Scorpion was somewhat nervous, but still controlled his charred, deformed arm to place it in Saul's palm. Saul's mental power penetrated it. Indeed, there's also black powder in the demon limb, but it's slightly more active than the black powder underground. Saul also asked about Scorpion's demon seeding method, which Scorpion truthfully explained. "You just said your demon limb isn't very powerful. How is this compared?" Scorpion answered more carefully. "My demon limb just has greater strength and isn't very long. Occasionally it can be used for sneak attacks, but it's not as powerful as other people in the tribe. So my new father doesn't want to raise me and lied, saying I came of age. Actually, I'm only 8 years old, still 2 years away from 10. Scorpion was counting on his fingers, still 2 years short. So this was the so-called forced maturation, lying about age. Saul nodded. suddenly raised his hand and tapped twice on Scorpion's deformed arm, then extended his arm to point at Scorpion's forehead. Scorpion was terrified, thinking the god was going to attack him, and fell backward in response. However, after sitting on the ground, he found he wasn't dead or injured, just had an itchy scalp. Saul waved his hand again, and just as Scorpion was about to ask what happened, his eyes rolled back and he fainted. I planted a parasite in Scorpion's body. I'll teach you the control method later. You stay here with Scorpion for now. Unless you can cast first-rank magic, don't rashly seek out those tribes. Noah nodded repeatedly. When I have time, I'll go look at those tribes first. For now, you should still move around near the cottage and be careful of the monsters they mentioned. Noah continued nodding obediently. Saul left him new magic crystals and several scrolls, and when time was up, he left the Chaos Realm. After Saul left, Noah, who had been looking obedient, suddenly looked at Scorpion. God, he smiled. Actually taking a master for a god, what a backward and ignorant world. However, letting my master become a god isn't bad either. His gaze gradually became fervent. Master wants to explore this world, but my power alone is too weak, and my master is very busy. I can completely assign this task to believers. When the time comes, this entire world will be mentors. Master will become the true god of this world. Noah grinned, smiling extremely happily. Chapter 653, Demon Seeding Experiment. When the day's time limit was up, Saul reactivated the Chaos Realm Compass and returned to the Purity Wizard Tower. His sudden trip to the Chaos Realm had originally been to check whether Noah's exploration had made any new progress. Unexpectedly, this visit happened to save Noah and Scorpion. From Scorpion's words, Saul finally gained some understanding of the existing civilization in the Chaos Realm. Moreover, he had stumbled upon these people's utilization of black powder. The people of the Chaos Realm inject the purest black powder into infants. Some bobbies will mutate as a result, thus gaining the capital to survive in the Chaos Realm, while those who don't undergo demon seeding will turn into monsters after a few years. This shows that, although the black tide pollution in the Chaos Realm has degraded into black powder form, it still has a subtle influence on people. I need to thoroughly check Noah's physical condition every time I go there. Then, black powder brought from the Chaos Realm to the wizard world must also have this pollution ability. However, it remains very inert. Could I try awakening the black powder by demon seeding myself? Saul currently hadn't found a method to make black tide pollution degrade, but he could first research ways to activate black powder in reverse and try to work backwards. Thinking meant doing. Saul left the 4th floor without hesitation and came to the first basement level. At this time, Camus was still spacing out. Saul took several materials, and the black powder kept here. Just as he was about to go upstairs to the 3rd floor where Byron was located to begin experiments, Camus, who had never actively spoken, called out to stop Saul. "What experiment are you going to do with that black powder?" Saul half turned around. "The inertization formula. Haven't you always known?" Camus said nothing more, but kept watching Saul's back until he left the first basement level. Coming to the laboratory on the 3rd floor of the Wizard Tower, Saul knocked on the door. The door opened automatically. When Saul entered, he found Senior Byron was meditating. This laboratory was already chaotic in his usual style, with only the items on the experiment table arranged in an orderly manner. Other places were almost impossible to step on. Just as Saul was about to take flight, he heard Byron's emotionless voice. "Don't cast magic in the room. We need to maintain a clean experimental environment." "Is my magical power dirty?" Saul jokingly asked, but still followed Byron's request, tiptoeing through the clutter on the floor. Byron only gave one instruction and continued meditating, seemingly not worried at all about Saul touching his experimental results. Byron, who had been immersed in data all day, was now recovering his mental power, but Saul was destined not to let him rest well. I just went to the Chaos Realm. The name Chaos Realm made Byron open his eyes immediately. It shouldn't be a month yet. Did something happen? The inertization formula might be more important than I previously thought, and I picked up a local person there and got some news. Saul told Byron exactly what Scorpion had said. You want to work backwards first. Saul nodded. He directly took out the black powder he had just brought up from below. I plan to try demon seeding on myself. Byron got up from the ground and walked to Saul's side. Your environmental conditions are very different. Such an experiment might not yield the same results. Saul nodded. He naturally knew this principle. Whether demon seeding succeeds isn't important. I mainly want to record the entire reaction process. Since black powder can cause mutations in bodies, it definitely isn't completely non-polluting, if we can find the reason for its pollution to take effect. We can amplify it and make the inert black powder completely become the original black tide pollution. Byron continued very tacitly. Saul nodded. He immediately picked up the silver dagger on the experiment table, sharp enough. Just be careful to relax your muscles. Saul looked down as the silver blade cut through the skin on his wrist. He said not to cut blood vessels that would kill people. That means don't touch arteries. Saul recalled the entire demon seeding process, restrained all magical power on his body, gently applied a pinch of the purest black powder to the wound, then wrapped it with bandages. Originally, Scorpion's tribe would also use blood-activating medicine to prevent the wound from healing too quickly. But Saul could naturally control his own muscles and let the black penetrate his blood vessels. Or we could make a syringe and inject the black powder directly into veins. Saul quickly completed the entire demon seeding process. During the process, lacking some herbs and materials unique to the Chaos Realm, he relied on controlling his body's reactions. After the black powder entered his blood, it began traveling along his blood vessels. However, it would often get blocked at certain blood vessels after not traveling far. The body's rejection reaction would also turn the blocked area into an isolated small packet. There's a radiation reaction. Byron had already brought testing instruments and began checking the radiation on Saul. Because Saul carefully restrained his magical power and mental power, the instruments accurately detected the radiation coming from the wound. The reaction is very weak and continues to weaken. It's gone. Byron, who was about to record, straightened up helplessly. Because the radiation-emitting reaction on Saul's arm had completely disappeared. Indeed, my resistance to black tide pollution caused the black powder's influence to be quickly eliminated. Saul knew this first experiment would end like this. His skin turned gray and became slightly transparent. Then some tiny black particles appeared on his forearm. Byron wanted to use a small brush and bottle to collect these black particles, but just as the slightly stiff wolf hair brush swept over them, those black powders turned into black smoke and disappeared. Your body not only resisted the black powder's influence, but also destroyed the pollution source. Byron threw the tools in his hands back on the table, then began rolling up his sleeves. We can't experiment with your body. I'll do it instead. But Saul shook his head. Senior, don't forget where your skin comes from. It has even less experimental value, right? Byron's sleeve rolling motion stopped, and he quietly lowered them again. He always forgot how special his current body was. I need some test subjects. Saul touched his arm. Everyone in the Wizard Tower lacks the characteristic of being ordinary. Byron nodded. You conduct preliminary data statistics first. I'll continue my experiment. Saul couldn't help asking, Senior, how is your inertization formula research going? Byron smacked his lips, should be soon. However, Byron didn't tell Saul his specific experimental progress. Probably because he wasn't clear how long soon meant either. However, Saul, who confidently left the laboratory to Byron, never expected that Byron had just said the experiment was about to have a breakthrough, but then something went wrong immediately. The next day, Saul was sitting on the thick ice layer of Rhine Lake using little algae to fish for souls inside. Recently, experiments and studying had consumed a large amount of souls. Rhine Lake hadn't had new dead people for a long time and was almost emptied by him. Just as little algae's head drilled into the ice, the pure white wizard tower behind Saul suddenly let out a huge bang, as if a wall had been smashed with a big hole. Even the ice layer where Saul was located trembled, making creepy, groaning sounds. Saul turned around, mouth agape in shock, to find his wizard tower really had a big hole smashed in it. Behind the pitch-black hole, Senior Byron, still maintaining his original appearance, suddenly radiated dazzling charm, making those ordinary features instantly possess a terrible attractiveness that one couldn't look away from. Even Saul couldn't help but be momentarily dazed. After being stunned for a moment, just as he was about to go forward to check on Byron's condition, the other party suddenly jumped up. He jumped very high and very far, then when passing over Rhine Lake, smack! He crashed onto the ice surface. Chapter 654, Byron's Mutation. Holy shit! Saul's hand shook, directly throwing little algae onto the ice surface and running toward Byron not far from him. Just as he took a step, Byron, who was sprawled on the ice surface, jumped up like a monkey, then ran on all fours across the ice like a monkey, and ran quite fast at that. Seeing he couldn't catch up temporarily, Saul immediately whistled, calling down the giant bird Diu that had been scared into flight by the earlier sound. At the same time, little algae also dropped the soul in its mouth and emerged its tentacle tip from the ice hole. Catch him, Saul shouted sternly. Although his back was to Byron, he had already realized something was wrong. Byron's mind must have been affected by something, causing his sanity to have problems now. However, thinking that he initially still knew to use magic to fly, if treated promptly, the problem shouldn't be serious. The first to catch up was Diu. Diu flew over Byron, then extended its long tentacles, trying to tie Byron up. But Byron, who seemed mentally unclear, moved very agilely, ducking his head, jumping high, dodging left and right, actually using several complex movements to directly evade the siege of 4 tentacles. But the evasive movements also slowed his speed, so little algae arrived next, directly opening its shark-toothed mouth, then retracting its sharp teeth and biting onto Byron's robes. Byron was bitten and jerked backward, nearly falling on the smooth ice surface. But his balance was good. After shifting his center of gravity several times, he stood firm again. However, the first thing he did after standing firm was to open his mouth wide and bite back on little algae's tentacle tip. Little algae. Little algae's body had no sense of pain, which was why it could split and merge at will. However, just as the naive little algae was about to mock Byron for overestimating himself and competing in bite force, it suddenly felt real pain. Screech! Little algae suddenly released its grip, opened its mouth wide, and its black tongue extended out, shaking like waves, as if it had really been bitten and hurt. Saul was somewhat surprised, but quickly reacted. Little algae wasn't really in pain, but had been affected by Byron's mental power. At this time, Saul, 3 meters away from Byron, pushed off with his feet and suddenly pounced, pinning down Byron, who was biting against little Algie. The moment Saul touched Byron, he also felt as if his neck was being bitten by some huge beast, as if feeling muscles being torn, bones breaking, as if feeling blood spurting from wounds, shooting 3 meters high. But in Saul's vision, nothing had happened. No one had been bitten. Tactile sensation severely affected. Saul endured the pain, keeping his expression unchanged as he pinned Byron to the ground. Then, without looking at his face, he prepared to pick him up and run back. On the ice surface, Byron couldn't fly, and Saul couldn't perform treatment. The consciousness space still had some polluting properties, making him afraid to use it carelessly on Byron. He just wanted to run back to the wizard tower first, then use tentacles to absorb the pollution in Byron's body. But Byron seemed very unwilling to return to the wizard tower and began struggling violently. His head suddenly twisted 180 degrees, his eyes wide open, pupils contracted extremely small, looking very creepy. Saul's first instinct was to turn his head and avoid the other party's gaze. He knew too well how much influence Byron could have on people's mental power after having elf skin. However, he still underestimated Byron's current strength. Little Algie, which was trying hard to help Saul tie up Byron, suddenly turned its head to bite Saul. Sharp teeth all extended out, almost able to reflect sunlight. If bitten by this, probably an entire arm would be disabled. He can even affect little Algie. Saul released one hand gripping Byron and slapped little Algie's lower jaw with a crack, sending it flying. Then, without stopping, he prepared to go back. However, little Algie was deeply affected, and after not flying far, turned its head again to bite toward Saul's face. At this time, Byron's body also twisted like a snake, actually breaking free from Saul's other arm. Saul was distracted and almost got bitten by little Algie. He quickly turned his head sideways, pressing both hands on little Algie's upper and lower jaws, holding its mouth shut. When he turned back, Byron had run far away again. After leaving Byron's 3-meter range, little Algie suddenly came to its senses. It no longer struggled and even merged its split mouth back into a single tentacle. Saul released little Algie, seeing it behaving obediently but somewhat dejectedly with its head lowered, obviously incredulous about having just attacked Saul. And a bit scared. Saul patted little Algie's head. "You go back first. Senior's mental power's influence is too strong. You all can't withstand it." After speaking, Saul continued pursuing Byron. However, this time he changed his mind. He would wait until they ran out of Rhine Lake's magic forbidden range before pinning him down for treatment. If that really didn't work, he'd even resort to using the consciousness space. He had to get hold of the person first. The borderland was no kind place. There were many high-rank wizards here, and even more dangerous areas. Running out like this with unclear consciousness, the outcome would very likely be death. Byron ran out of Rhine Lake first. Fortunately, he seemed to have forgotten he could fly and continued running with his legs. Just then, a strange flying vehicle with metal wings fixed on both sides descended from the sky. The flying vehicle had a spindle-shaped cabin in the middle, about the size of a double-carriage compartment. In midair, an opening appeared on the flying vehicle's cabin. Then two people jumped down one after the other. One was tall and thin, nearly 2 meters with dark skin. The other was slightly shorter, with a face that only had eyes and no other features. The two landed and happened to encounter Byron running toward them. "Is this the Purity Wizard Tower? Are you Saul?" the dark-skinned wizard asked. But Byron had no intention of acknowledging him and just wanted to run between the two. The wizard, whose face only had a pair of eyes, had his pupils rotate, staring fixedly at Byron, then suddenly attacked. The ground beneath Byron's feet immediately extended over a dozen pale arms, all grabbing Byron's calves. Byron immediately counterattacked, black light surging in his hands. His first reaction was to use this mass of light carrying death energy to kill the arms on the ground. The dark-skinned wizard laughed disdainfully. "We stopped you to talk, yet you're attacking us." Then he raised his hand, and a mass of electric light actually quickly formed a spear in his palm, which he then raised and threw toward Byron's back. Looking at that direction, it was aimed right at Byron's head. He was going for the kill right away. However, Byron was being entangled by the arms on the ground and didn't notice the danger behind him for a moment. Just as the golden lightning spear was about to pierce Byron's skull, a black blade came from behind and struck first, slashing the golden spear in half and deflecting it. Byron finally heard the commotion behind him, immediately turned around, and saw the dark-skinned wizard's murderous intent. Although his mind was unclear at this time, his perception of people's emotions was even clearer. He immediately sensed this person wanted to kill him. So his pupils, which had originally contracted to pinpoint size, suddenly dilated, almost filling his entire eye sockets. Saul had just run near the group when he saw one of the wizards trying to kill Byron. He quickly blocked the strike for Byron, then immediately condensed the next blade, stabbing toward the dark-skinned wizard's back of the head from his visual blind spot. However, the dark-skinned wizard suddenly turned around, throwing himself at his companion, with two sharp electric light swords growing from his palms, swinging at his former companion. Like little algae, he had been influenced by Byron and wanted to kill his own companion. The wizard with only eyes looked calmly at all this, suddenly raised his hand, and the dark-skinned wizard running toward him to attack had his head fall to the ground with a thunk. The headless body ran forward 2 steps before collapsing. Only then did blood begin spurting out. Chapter 655, Meeting. Saul frowned slightly from behind. That lightning-using wizard should have been a fairly capable first-rank wizard, while the wizard with only eyes was definitely second-rank. But how had he killed his companion? Saul hadn't been able to detect it for a moment. His hands began to soften, and his mental power became highly tense, preparing to use a powerful move right away. However, the wizard with only eyes didn't attack Saul or Byron again. He still bound Byron with over a dozen arms, then allowed Saul to approach. Saul remained vigilant about the other party's movements as he walked to Byron's side, transforming his index finger into a tentacle and pressing it against the back of his neck. The sucker on the tentacle firmly bit Byron's skin, then began absorbing the black particles inside. While pursuing Byron earlier, Saul had already been observing his body. However, Byron's skin was special. Saul's mental power couldn't penetrate it. Finally, after reaching shore and taking out the Eye of Banishment, he found the most severely polluted area on Byron's body. Saul had originally wanted to immediately transform into a tentacle monster to capture Senior Byron, but 2 wizards had unexpectedly appeared midway. As the pollution was gradually absorbed into Saul's fingertip, Byron finally stopped struggling, closed his eyes, and collapsed among the pale arms. At this time, those pale arms that had been tightly gripping Byron also released him, and instantly turned into a pile of white bones scattered on the ground. Saul severed his blackened fingertip and stored it in a bottle. Byron also reopened his eyes, which became clear. The moment he opened his eyes, he recalled what he had just done, frowning slightly, but because outsiders were present, he didn't speak. He just silently stood up and walked to Saul's side. The wizard across from them, who had suddenly killed his own companion, walked to the head that had fallen to the ground, picked it up, casually lifted his shirt at his lower abdomen, and forcibly pressed the head in his hands into his belly. His belly was like a muddy swamp, and actually managed to stuff the dark-skinned wizard's head inside. Saul and Byron exchanged glances, both understanding that this wizard before them also specialized in dark attributes. His body had definitely undergone some kind of wizard body transformation. After doing all this, the wizard with only eyes didn't launch an attack on Saul and Byron. His facial skin bulged a few times, then suddenly grew a mouth. Saul immediately noticed that this newly grown mouth was identical to the mouth of the head the other party had just devoured. It was like pressing someone else's mouth onto his own face. "It seems you are the master of the Purity Wizard Tower, Lord Saul," the wizard who had grown a mouth said, facing Saul. "Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Luke from the Stargate Council. Currently, like you, I'm a candidate competing for third rank." Peyer had mentioned that the candidate selected by the Stargate Council was indeed named Luke. He hadn't expected him to come so quickly. Did this mean the selection for third-rank wizards was about to begin? "Hello, I'm Saul." Wizard Luke's mouth corners slightly raised, then he looked at Byron beside them. "May I ask who this is?" Generally, wizards rarely paid attention to people of lower rank than themselves. Luke's eagerness to inquire about Byron's identity obviously showed he had been deeply impressed by Byron's earlier performance. Byron only briefly introduced his name without saying more. Luke's mouth corners continued to rise, gradually forming a strange V shape. "Very pleased to meet you both. I hope to have the opportunity to personally dissect you." Saul slowly blinked. "Good luck with that." Luke didn't understand what Saul was saying. It didn't seem like cursing, but it didn't sound pleasant either. At this time, Saul looked toward another direction and suddenly spoke. "You've been watching for quite a while. Won't you come out and chat together?" The air immediately rippled, and a figure appeared. It was a very short little girl, appearing to be just over 1.3 meters tall, but very cute with skin as delicate as a doll's. Not only that, but many of her features looked more like a fake person than a real one. For example, her skin was so pale it looked painted, and there were faint stitching marks at her neck, mouth, and other organs. However, Saul's own mental power feedback told him that the doll-like girl was indeed a living person. When Luke saw the girl, his first reaction was to look at Saul, somewhat surprised. "How did you discover Corey?" Though I don't want to admit it, Corey's mental power concealment technique is really very powerful. He looked at Corey again. "I really want to cut open her brain and take a look." "Heh, so you want to dissect everyone you meet?" Saul rolled his eyes internally, but remained expressionless on the surface. "Hello, Lady Corey." Corey didn't respond immediately but mechanically walked between Saul and Luke, the three forming a triangular position. She turned her head horizontally to look at Saul, only then responding, really like a puppet. When she spoke, her jaw separated and moved away from her upper jaw. "You can call me Corey. I heard you're Gorsa's favorite apprentice." "What a question." "My master has never said so personally." Corey turned her head back to face forward directly. "I'll be watching you in the upcoming selection. Don't disgrace Gorsa." Is this what a competitor should say? And Corey kept saying Gorsa this and Gorsa that. Could it be? "My master already has a wife." Luke and Corey were both stunned simultaneously. After a moment, Luke burst into laughter. Then his already stiff and twisted mouth suddenly fell to the ground, and his laughter immediately became muffled. Corey frowned. Her eyebrows did indeed move toward the center, but the angle didn't change at all. "I admire him. He's a genius of the Glare family. You can't." Saul unceremoniously interrupted Corey. "My master's glory doesn't need others to maintain it. Similarly, my talent doesn't need others' recognition." Corey's eyebrows drew even closer together. She seemed unable to understand Saul's meaning, but apparently didn't intend to argue with him. Having met Saul and witnessed his flexible magical power and powerful keen mental power, Corey had achieved her purpose. "Then I'll see you at the selection." Corey left with her back to the group. After walking dozens of meters, a huge pumpkin carriage suddenly appeared on the empty grassland in front of her. Corey's knees didn't move as her entire body floated up. The pumpkin carriage door opened, and after Corey's entire body floated inside, it automatically closed. The scene before them was like a puppet doll getting into a puppet carriage. Is she the person originally designated by the Glare family? "Since we've met, I'll head back too, looking forward to the day of competition." Luke picked up the mouth from the ground and pressed it back to his jaw. "Has the competition content been decided?" Saul asked unceremoniously. Luke had already called for his flying shuttle and shrugged. "Who knows? Perhaps when we don't know it, the competition has already begun." Chapter 656. True Wizards Compete with Brains. The Stargate Council didn't play tricks with the competition's contents. Or rather, such an important selection couldn't tolerate any shortcuts. Not long after the three candidates met each other for the first time near Rhine Lake, Miss Lucy, as the Stargate Council's representative in the borderland, brought the decisions of the chairman and Glare family head, summoning the three candidates to Old Days Manor near Rhine Lake. Old Days Manor had experienced the previous incident and had been jointly cleared multiple times by Herbert and Pear. However, they hadn't found any clues about the killer who murdered Clark. Although they had located the killer's mental power characteristics through regression and mental power detection, this type of mental power was very rare. Based solely on these mental power characteristics, they couldn't match them to any known third-rank wizard. It was either a third-rank wizard who lived in seclusion, or the other party had deliberately disguised their original mental power characteristics. But the second method was extremely difficult. In Saul's view, it was like getting a complete blood transfusion. Therefore, he was very certain that his powerful and maverick master was preparing to cause trouble again. Due to the repeated entry and destruction by the two third ranks, Old Days Manor had lost its original spatial overlapping power. The interior was severely damaged. Broken and magnificent scenes switched chaotically, eventually becoming like the old television Saul had seen, turning into black and white static. In short, it looked even more like a haunted house than before. Standing with Byron at the gate of Old Days Manor, Saul waited for Lucy and the others to appear. He saw Byron staring at Old Days Manor in a daze and asked with concern, "Senior, will the residual pollution here affect you?" Byron turned back, his expression clear and calm. "No. These past few days, there have been no signs of pollution recurring. I was just thinking about the secrets of space. Isn't it said that only fourth-rank wizards can master the mysteries of space? How did Tower Master Gorsa manage to do all this when he was only second rank?" Ever since Byron had accidentally been polluted in his mental power during experiments at the Wizard Tower a few days ago, Saul had been traveling with Byron. Since they hadn't detected the cause of the pollution that affected Byron's spiritual body afterward, to prevent others from being unable to treat pollution in time, Saul had brought Byron to Old Days Manor together. "My master is after all a genius even within a large family that has fourth-rank wizards, and he should have had many extraordinary experiences back then." Saul truly admired Gorsa in this regard. He had now accidentally obtained the method to open the Chaos Realm, had crossed space several times, and had even personally set up short-distance spatial teleportation formations, yet still didn't know how to easily cross spatial dimensions like his master. However, although he didn't know how to traverse space, through their last conversation and what Master Gorsa had taken from him, Saul vaguely guessed what Gorsa wanted to do. No wonder he looked down on both the tribunal and Stargate Council in his words. He wanted to do something so crazy. He just didn't know if he would ultimately succeed. Saul and Byron stood in place for a while, then saw a pumpkin carriage from a fairy tale gradually become visible from transparency. The carriage slowly stopped before the two. The door automatically opened, and emerald green vines automatically wove into steps. Wizard Corey, like a human doll, descended from the pumpkin carriage. Her movements were still rigid like wood. This time, perhaps because the selection was officially beginning, Corey and Saul didn't greet each other, merely nodding to each other as polite acknowledgement. After several more minutes, Luke's flying shuttle descended from the sky. Luke still jumped directly down from midair. A first-rank wizard also followed beside him, but when he approached, Saul and Byron discovered that this first-rank wizard was actually still that dark-skinned wizard. Even the scar on his neck remained, messily sewn up with black fine thread, flesh tangled together, with some subcutaneous tissue still exposed outside, but seemingly no longer affecting the dark-skinned wizard's movements. His mouth shape was also somewhat wrinkled, as if it had once been twisted and then forcibly ironed flat. We meet again. Luke's face still only had a pair of eyes, but as he approached, he took out a bloody mouth from his pocket and placed it where the mouth should be. However, it was carelessly attached, making the mouth somewhat crooked. Seeing Saul notice the first-rank wizard behind him, Luke's voice carried more pride. Kafka is my assistant, very useful. I've always been reluctant to truly let him die, so I had to expend some effort to revive him. The dark-skinned Kafka was Luke's subordinate, so Saul couldn't directly examine him with mental power. But from Kafka's wary look at Byron, he really might be the wizard who had been confused by Byron and then attacked Luke in chaos. Revival. Corey walked over with rigid steps, unceremoniously approaching Kafka's front, seemingly wanting to directly test the other party's authenticity with her hands. Please feel free. Luke seemed not to mind Corey's direct probing. It's just a revival experiment, not particularly difficult. Is this mapping to Master Gorsa? Saul heard it but wasn't angry. Gorsa's revival experiments had stopped being secret during the Wizard Tower Rebellion. It was normal for core personnel in these major forces to know about it. Presumably, Gorsa wouldn't care about others' evaluations either. However, the aura around Corey suddenly turned cold. She understood and seemed to truly admire Gorsa. But before the atmosphere could worsen, Miss Lucy had already emerged from Old Days Manor. She was expressionless, looking much more coldly beautiful than when they had parted last time. She still wore an ornate, somewhat androgynous lady's dress, with silk high heels that would only appear at court balls under her long trouser legs. The reason I asked you all here today is to announce the selection content for you as third-rank wizard candidates. Lucy didn't waste words. She didn't even politely greet the several people first. To become a third rank in the borderland, you must be more adaptable to the environment here than others. So the person among you with the strongest survival ability will receive support from the Stargate Council and Borderland to help you completely push open the door within your body. The mouth on Luke's face began to twist and deform again, as if the temporarily installed organ couldn't adapt to his face and would break down after some use. So it's a test of survival ability. How about direct combat to the death? His gaze swept between Saul and Corey in turn. Whoever becomes the final victor can naturally become the next third-rank wizard. Saul's eyes suddenly narrowed, hiding the amusement within. Really? A non-threatening mental power wave slowly spread from Saul's body. Though it had no aggressive intent, it simultaneously made everyone present feel their backs go cold, as if they were being watched by something terrifying. The words Luke was about to say suddenly caught in his throat. Looking at Saul, who had suddenly displayed his strength, His expression gradually became serious, and the muscles above his eyes slowly furrowed, as if encountering an opponent who needed careful handling. Corey's facial expression didn't change, but she turned her head 90 degrees, one eye watching Saul and one watching Luke. As if as soon as Miss Lucy said it was acceptable, the three would immediately begin a life-and-death duel without reservation, until only one of the three could still stand. But Lucy sneered coldly. "Are you a group of beasts who only know how to fight? True wizards compete with brains." Chapter 657, Free Labor. As soon as Lucy finished speaking, Saul withdrew his earlier aura. He had never believed that the Stargate Council selected powerful second ranks just to have them kill each other. That would be a foolish waste. However, Luke had provoked him covertly several times, and Saul wouldn't pretend not to notice. Anyway, if killing were really required, he would definitely be the one to survive to the end. No matter what trump cards these people had, once Saul opened his consciousness battlefield, none of them could escape. Moreover, he was now a second-rank wizard. Although he wasn't confident about using the mental battlefield to restrain third-rank wizards, dealing with wizards of the same rank was no problem. Corey's two eyeballs returned to their wooden stupor. Only Luke still looked somewhat stiff. Lucy was quite satisfied with the warning effect of her words, and the ice on her face melted somewhat. She raised her hand, and 3 floating magic scrolls suddenly appeared in her palm. Each scroll had an exquisite seal with golden patterns on it. This is a magic formation called Ice Lock that the Stargate Council just designed to suppress Storm Eyes. But for various reasons, it hasn't been completed yet. If any of you can complete the formation's design and improve your own strength to the degree where you can independently loosen the door within your body, you'll be considered victorious in the selection. The Stargate Council will provide all necessary human and material resources for advancement to help you completely push open the door within your body. None of the 3 candidates reacted strongly to Lucy's words. Obviously, not just Saul, but the others had also known about the rewards for successful selection before coming. They just hadn't expected the selection condition to be researching magic formations. Luke replaced himself with a new mouth and casually threw the old one to Kafka beside him. Kafka caught the mouth and swallowed it with a crunch, like a beast that had been hungry for a long time. Luke's revival has serious side effects, Saul thought, shaking his head internally. He can't compare to my mentor at all. Magic formation design and improvement are all measured in years. Isn't using this as a selection condition somewhat inappropriate? Luke said with his new mouth. Lucy turned to look at him. If you feel you can't complete the Ice Lock formation's design and modification within 1 year, you can withdraw from the selection. Luke immediately narrowed his eyes, obviously displeased with Lucy's words and attitude. Corey still showed no emotional expression. Saul touched his chin, seemingly thinking about how to complete the task quickly, but strangely thought, "It's not my imagination. Lucy really doesn't like this selection. Is she dissatisfied with the matter of selecting a third rank or dissatisfied with us candidates?" A flash of amusement passed through Saul's eyes. He hadn't overlooked that Lucy was also a second-rank wizard who had been wandering at second rank for a long time. If she were truly the young lady of the Stargate Council, perhaps she wouldn't care about this opportunity to advance to third rank. But she was just an artificial human. Stargate Chairman Alec might not be willing to give her so many resources for advancement. And relying on herself, Saul really hadn't seen how talented this young lady was. If someone among us can simultaneously loosen the door within their body and complete the Ice Lock formation design, how would that be calculated? Saul asked. Since it was a competition, the rules must be clarified. If 2 people simultaneously come to submit formations, or arrive at Old Days Manor within 1 day of each other, then we'll compare the quality of their formation designs. The one with tighter pollution containment wins. Lucy answered without hesitation, having obviously thought of this answer long ago. From your meaning, Luke had regained his composure by now, we don't need to research in the same place. How do you guarantee candidates won't cheat by seeking others' help? Saul thought, even if you locked me up with you all, you wouldn't discover me seeking others' help. I never said you couldn't seek others' help. Lucy gave an answer no one expected. Your knowledge and connections are also part of evaluating you. After all, we don't want a new third-rank wizard who can only fight independently when battle is needed. We don't want a powerful third-rank wizard. We want someone who can quickly step forward and solve problems when issues arise in the borderland. If any of you can invite a fifth-rank wizard, the Stargate Council would have no problem directly promoting you to Elder, let alone third rank. Seeing that no one had other questions, Lucy distributed the 3 scrolls to the 3 people. After Saul received his scroll, from the corner of his eye he still watched Lucy and saw her gaze also lingering on the scrolls. Indeed, she actually wants to be one of the candidates. Saul silently put away the scroll, called Byron, and the two flew away together on the giant bird Diu-Diu. Standing on the bird's back, Byron was the first to unfold the ice-lock scroll. Although this was a problem the Stargate Council had given to several second-rank wizards, Byron's foundational knowledge was sufficient to understand the topic. This ice-lock formation has the same problem-solving approach as part of the inertization formula we're currently researching. Saul glanced over and nodded. Both are about reducing the activity of black tide pollution. But they're thinking of freezing, while we're thinking of deactivation. The degree differs somewhat. Byron wasn't proud because of this. If we didn't have already deactivated black powder in our hands, we probably wouldn't have thought of this level either. Even if we had, we'd have no clue. This formation claims to be incomplete, but actually only has a general framework of thinking. Saul chuckled and stopped looking at the scroll. The Stargate Council found 3 free laborers to help them find new methods for sealing storm eyes. Even if we all fail in the end, they're not afraid. They can temporarily send a third rank to guard the borderland until the storm eye problem is solved. Byron slowly rolled up the formation scroll, saying in a flat voice, "But they don't know we're also researching similar problems. Although this formation only has a framework, it gives us a new method for solving problems. I now have new problem-solving ideas for a difficulty that had me stuck." Saul smiled and patted Diu-Diu beneath him. "Then let's speed up and return." The pale yellow giant bird traced a beautiful arc across the sky. The flying shuttle arrived on time to pick up its master. The pumpkin carriage disappeared on the road. Only Lucy remained, standing quietly at the gate of Old Days Manor. Her beautiful eyes were slightly lowered, looking at the ground diagonally in front, not knowing what she was thinking. After about 10 minutes, when the 3 candidates had gone far beyond sight, another person slowly emerged from Old Days Manor. He wore a smile on his face, walked with a casual posture, and his middle and ring fingers held a small silver harp. The feeling of personally sending away opportunities isn't pleasant, is it? Lucy suddenly turned around. The coldness on her face completely disappeared, gradually becoming a wronged but stubborn expression that couldn't be revealed. "You don't understand the situation. Don't talk nonsense." If it were before, Lucy might have attacked directly, but now after becoming familiar with Kismet, she found that although this person was frivolous and sometimes spoke nonsense, he was considerate and always unconsciously took care of her emotions. Plus, he had been half killed by Ophelia's punishment last time. If Lucy hadn't found him, he might have lain in this dangerous manner until death. This made Lucy reluctant to beat him up. "I'm not talking nonsense. I've watched clearly these past days. After you got the scroll, you waited another day before calling everyone over. You actually don't want to give up this opportunity to advance to third rank, right? Kismet's index finger gently slid across the strings, producing subtle yet lingering music. You also want to become a candidate, don't you? This is simple. I can help you kill one of them. Then wouldn't a candidate position be freed up? Kismet continued approaching, his breath already hitting the woman's forehead. Who do you want to die? Luke. Corey. Or Saul. Chapter 658, He Who Disturbs Hearts. Lucy lowered her head slightly, feeling Kismet's breath blowing against the hair strands on her forehead, as if the peaceful lakeside in her heart had been stirred into ripples. Kismet looked at Lucy, who was so close yet motionless, the corners of his mouth slowly curving into an arc. Just as he was about to say something more, Lucy suddenly raised her hand and struck his chest with her palm. Kismet immediately lost his balance and staggered back 2 steps. HMPH, you can barely stand steady now, yet you want to kill someone. You'd be more likely to get yourself killed. Lucy hadn't used magical power just now, only a bit more force. Kismet rubbed his chest, but his smile became even more obvious. Lucy no longer wanted to look at his smiling face and turned to walk toward Old Days Manor. But Kismet called out loudly behind her, I'm not joking, you know. Anyway, if such a precious opportunity were placed before me, I would definitely fight for it with all my might. Lucy didn't turn back or speak, her figure disappearing into the manor. Kismet's smile gradually faded, but the light in his eyes became even more brilliant. Gold, he murmured softly. A magic formation capable of sealing storm eyes was destined not to be magical research that could be easily completed. While the 3 candidates, Saul and the others, immersed themselves in research, other high-rank wizards in this world were also not idle. The Glare family was located in a world side attached to the edge of the wizard world. Originally, there had been several such world sides, but after the Abyssal Eye appeared, wizard inheritance was almost severed, and many world sides lost contact due to tremors in the main world. The Glare family's world side had survived until now largely because they once had 5th-rank wizard ancestors and 4th-rank wizard inheritance that had never been broken from the Dark Moon era to the Lunar Calendar era. Although the current Glare family patriarch held the position of elder in the Stargate Council, he almost never left the Glare family's world side. This was to maintain the connection between the world side and the main world. However, today Glare family head Norton left the world side because a fellow 4th-rank wizard had personally invited him to meet. This wizard was the tribunal chief, the 4th-rank wizard Frym, known as Where There Is Light, There He Is. The place the 2 wizards chose to meet was also very special, right at the Sighing Wall in the far north of Stat Continent. For 4th-rank wizards, spatial distance was no longer a constraint. Crossing continents took only a few minutes. So when Norton appeared at the highest point of the Sighing Wall, the surrounding candle flames flickered a few times, and Frym's figure appeared above. Unlike Norton's infant appearance, Frym was not in human form but was a ball of light. After this ball of light appeared, the surrounding candle lamps dimmed several degrees out of thin air. The infant form Norton sat directly on the wall, looking down at the endless waves below, and the black wall that seemed like it would never collapse, his little feet dangling as if he were truly a carefree child. The light above his head simply hung there quietly, as if just to illuminate him. They hadn't begun talking yet, because they were also waiting for someone. It's truly rare to see you 2 come out at the same time. Don't tell me the Tribunal and Stargate Council are about to formally go to war. A white-haired, white-bearded old man whose beard reached his knees slowly walked up the stairs behind the city wall, leaning on a black skull staff. Although this old wizard had completely white hair and beard, his skin was ruddy and he didn't have many wrinkles, looking only about 50. But he was the oldest person among the wizards present. Lord Murphy. Even Norton and Frym, who were fellow fourth-rank wizards at the world's top level, were respectful and polite when facing Murphy. If it weren't for this wizard Murphy in front of them, condensing all his knowledge and power into the sighing wall beneath their feet, Stat Continent would probably have been swallowed by the abyssal eye long ago. So even though both were hegemon-like figures, they still wouldn't be impolite before Wizard Murphy. Frym had set the meeting place here also certain that Norton wouldn't dare play tricks in this location. Facing a dying fourth rank whose body and soul had begun showing problems, Frym absolutely wouldn't allow himself to be taken down in a mutual destruction. Sorry to disturb Lord Murphy. I'd like to borrow your place to discuss some matters with Norton. The light orb made a deep voice in midair. Murphy nodded indifferently and didn't approach the two, standing 100 meters away. Although this distance wasn't really distance for them. After greetings, Light Orb Frym discussed the real purpose of this invitation with the Glare family head. Norton, your family's Gorsa hasn't been very well behaved lately. Childlike Norton spread his hands. How so? I've already had him resist the black tide at the sighing wall, and his recent battle record has been quite good. Norton turned his upper body to ask Murphy, right, Lord Murphy. Murphy chuckled like a real elder and picked his ear with his pinky finger. He's a good lad. I even met him on the first day he climbed the sighing wall. But Frym completely ignored these evasive words. He conducted revival experiments in Stat, and they were low-rank wizard revival experiments explicitly forbidden by the tribunal. As the family head, you wouldn't be unaware of this, would you? Norton said indifferently, children grow up and become disobedient. If you think you can't discipline Gorsa, I can do it for you. Norton looked up at the light orb above his head, his face still composed. That won't be necessary. Then please, Lord Norton, keep an eye on your child. If I discover him landing on Nefrit Continent again to conduct those rebellious experiments, I will personally issue a purge order against him. Norton's eyes narrowed slightly, but he still had a smile on his face. Fine, then I'll personally experience the tribunal chief's purge order. Before he finished speaking, a layer of soft white light appeared around Norton's body, not as dazzling as the golden light around Frym. But when the two types of light made contact, all the seawater below the sighing wall came to a standstill. The world seemed to enter a static state. But it wasn't truly time-stopping, but rather a power equilibrium phenomenon caused by two powerful forces simultaneously mobilizing nearby magical elements. At this time, Wizard Murphy beside them suddenly raised the skull staff in his hand and tapped it on the ground. The world that had seemed frozen began moving again. I say, you two shouldn't fight on the sighing wall, Wizard Murphy said helplessly. He had known before coming that these two fourth-rank wizards would definitely fight, and also knew they would definitely wait for him to break it up. Sure enough, when the world resumed operation, Norton and Frym both restrained their power. Norton spoke first. My family's junior doesn't need the chief's concern. If the chief really wants to help me educate my junior, don't blame me for being protective. Frym's light began to dim. It's useless for you to stop me. What he's doing, even if the tribunal doesn't interfere, there will definitely be consequences to resolve this troublemaker. As the last word was spoken, the golden light orb instantly disappeared, and the surrounding dim firelight became bright again. After Frym left, Norton nodded to Wizard Murphy beside him, and his figure also disappeared. After both troublemakers had left, Wizard Murphy stood on the empty city wall gazing at the distant sea. Frym personally came to test Norton. Could Norton really not hold on? Seawater crashed against the city wall with rushing sounds. The sighing wall stood in the far north day after day, year after year, like a giant who would never fall. But now, the giant's creator sighed softly on the city wall. Is this world truly still salvageable? Chapter 659, Stars. Saul raised his head from the complex calculation sketches. It had been almost 3 months since receiving the Ice Lock Formation design scroll. The Wizard Tower also welcomed the first snow of winter in early December. Because he liked watching snow scenes, Saul had the Wizard Tower transform an entire wall into floor-to-ceiling windows. Whenever his brain became stiff from high-speed operation, Saul would look outside and space out for a while. While spacing out, Saul saw 2 small black dots rapidly approaching Rhine Lake through the white snow. Jiajiagu is here, Saul quietly told Byron and slipped away. Whenever Jiajiagu brought someone over, Saul knew he had introduced another patient to him. Jiajiagu had been enthusiastically introducing patients to Saul lately. Almost every month he would bring someone over. Saul didn't know how he managed to make so many true wizards willing to trust him. After all, Saul's treatment required using mental power to scan the patient and determine the pollution source's location. If the pollution source was well hidden, Saul even needed to conduct experiments to find it. This was equivalent to having a wizard entrust their safety to a stranger. Not everyone had Jiajiagu's initial courage. Although Saul was studying the selection problem given by the Stargate Council, occasionally coming out to help these wizards polluted by the same black tide could deepen his understanding of the black tide. It also gave him a mental break. He quickly used the giant bird Diu Diu to bring the two into the Wizard Tower. Then Jiajiagu followed Steward Hope to trade. Saul led the patient to the 3rd floor. May I ask your name? Saul skillfully changed into a white wizard robe. Recently, he had been intentionally using clothes to distinguish between his different work, reminding himself not to dissect the polluted patients on the experiment table. I'm Eid, Lord Saul. After changing into the white robe, the already young Saul appeared even more gentle and handsome, allowing the first-rank wizard lying on the experiment table to relax slightly. Although Eid looked to be in his 40s and had been an official wizard much longer than Saul, the strict hierarchy among wizards and the huge power gap between different ranks left Eid completely without the presence of an elder. He lay on the cold, hard experiment table, trying to control his eyes not to wander, but the various bottles and jars around still attracted his attention. These instruments also appeared in Eid's laboratory, but when he was lying on the experiment table, his perception of these instruments was completely different. Seeing the somewhat nervous Eid, Saul had no intention of mocking him. He used simple hypnosis to first put him in a relaxed state, then began a full-body examination. 2 hours later, Saul confirmed the pollution source in Eid's body and performed preliminary cleansing. After he properly stored the extracted pollution source, Eid had already gotten down from the experiment table, looking at his hands with surprise and joy. Before treatment, his hands had been out of control for a long time. They often made strange movements and would even suddenly grab a silver knife to stab at his chest while he was experimenting. If he hadn't precast defensive magic, he probably would have been seriously injured by his own hands. Now, he finally felt these hands were back under his control. Thank you very much, Lord Saul. I can only provide these materials now, but I'll make up the rest as soon as possible. Saul cleaned his hands while smiling. There's no rush. Eid thanked him again, and seeing Saul's nonchalant attitude, he determined in his heart to definitely complete the remaining materials within a month. After Eid came out of Saul's wizard tower, he saw Jiajiagu was already waiting for him outside. "How was it? Dr. Saul is amazing, right?" Jiajiagu looked proud as if he shared in the glory. Eid nodded, and couldn't help but have some doubts about the relationship between Jiajiagu and Saul. Could Jiajiagu actually be Wizard Saul's person? But just as he thought this, he saw Jiajiagu grinning and rushing over, grabbing his hand. "You also really admire Wizard Saul, don't you?" Eid was stunned. Although he was indeed very grateful to Saul, it wasn't to the point of admiration. However, since Jiajiagu had asked so directly, and he was now standing under the man's wizard tower. "Yes, I really admire Wizard Saul." Eid nodded vigorously again. "Haha, we all admire Wizard Saul, so we're good friends now. When I sell you goods in the future, I won't secretly mark up prices." Eid's heart leaped with joy, then with alarm. "Then what you told me was half price before." "Sai, mark up first then half price anyway. It's about the same as the original price." "Then you need to give me an even better deal in the future." "No problem." Saul had already returned to the third floor of the wizard tower, leaning against the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the two discuss intimately. After they left Rhine Lake, Saul used the eye of banishment to clearly see that an eye with 7 colored pupils had also grown on the back of Eat's head. Not counting Brando and Jiajiagu, this is already the third patient to grow an eye. Saul's expression was grave, without any of the contentment he'd had when seeing off the patient earlier. "As long as people harbor some goodwill toward me, they'll grow 7 colored eyes after contact with Jiajiagu. But those who thank me on the surface but have no grateful emotions inside won't grow eyes. Do these eyes from the stars in my space require checking favorability ratings when spreading?" However, until now, Saul hadn't discovered that the star eyes caused any physical damage to the infected. Not only that, people with star eyes were very difficult for the black tide to continue polluting. Even if they still had pollution, it wouldn't worsen unless they encountered more extreme situations. Looking at it this way, people infected with star eyes were like having received a vaccine, gaining quite strong resistance to the disease like black tide. However, although the star eyes come from my consciousness space, I currently have no control over them. Powerful forces that can't be controlled by me are ultimately a hidden danger. Saul had previously discovered that those stars in his consciousness space were somewhat different, but since there was also an equally mysterious diary in his space, he hadn't paid much attention to those stars he couldn't control anyway. But unlike the diary that never made contact with the outside world, now the stars had already come to the outside world through Brando, showing regular but almost irresistible infectiousness. This made Saul unable to ignore their existence and the powerful force they contained any longer. After thinking, Saul suddenly turned back and said to Byron, "Senior, I need to do an experiment." Byron was still busy with his experiment, asking without looking up, "What do you need me to do?" "Help me watch my body. If my condition becomes abnormal, no, when my body deteriorates quite seriously, then stimulate my soul body from outside and try your best to wake me up." Byron put down the test tube in his hands, his expression serious. "What are you going to do?" Saul pressed his lips together, not knowing if he felt nervous or excited. "I'm going to meet a group of old friends who have always been by my side, but whose true nature I still can't figure out." Chapter 660, Conversation. Saul didn't choose to enter the consciousness space from his mushroom bed. Because what he was about to do in the consciousness space carried certain dangers. For convenience, he first lay down on the experiment table where Eid had just been lying. The hard and cold experiment table made Saul's spirit jolt, while the uncomfortable position also made his mind increasingly clear, knowing what he needed to do next. He turned his head to glance at Byron, as well as several consciousness bodies who had rushed over upon hearing the commotion. "Well then, I'm about to begin." Agu frowned and crawled to Saul's side. "Master, let me accompany you inside." Saul didn't agree. "If it weren't for the fact that Morden hasn't constructed a consciousness body, I would want him to come out too. The stars won't show mercy to you all. I'll go take a look first, and if there's no danger, then I'll let you go in." Having said this, Saul didn't give them a chance to request anything further and directly closed his eyes. Byron, standing nearby, was confused by what he heard, but since Saul hadn't explained, he didn't ask either. He simply silently prepared all the potions and magic scrolls that could help keep someone alert. Saul wanted to have a conversation with the stars in his consciousness space. This was his first attempt at communication. He wasn't sure whether he could succeed, but fortunately, when he had this thought, the diary didn't issue a death warning. Opening his eyes again, Saul had successfully entered the consciousness platform. The diary above his head lay open and flat, like a massive roof ridge, providing Saul with shelter from the sky. And on the platform's up, down, front, back, left, and right sides in distant and pitch-black places, countless stars flickered. It was as if he were placed in the universe. "When I first came in, I thought you were products of my consciousness's imagination. Later, I gradually discovered your uniqueness. You can make first-rank wizards die inexplicably, and you can easily pollute second-rank wizards without them noticing." Saul looked up, trying to communicate with the surrounding stars. "Although I don't know what kind of power you represent, since you've been helping me all along, I haven't pursued the matter. Or rather, I subconsciously believed you were harmless to me, just like believing one's own hand wouldn't strangle oneself." The surrounding stars continued to flicker, their frequency slightly accelerated, just like what Saul could vaguely sense, his body's slightly quickened heartbeat. "But now you seem unsatisfied with staying in my consciousness space. Do you want to leave, or do you just want to go out and stretch your muscles?" The surrounding stars still flickered, and Saul found no pattern in their changes, completely unable to tell whether the stars were responding to him. "This isn't working." He slowly paced forward until he reached the edge of the circular platform. Through consciousness observation, the surrounding stars' sizes hadn't changed, obviously being very far from him. "To advance to third rank, I must push open the door within my body. But if I push open the door, does that mean external forces can directly interact with the forces inside my body? Would the existence of these stars then have other effects on me and the outside world?" Saul wasn't certain. If he pushed open the door, would these already restless stars try to slip out through the crack? Or would they not come out, but transmit their pollution to the people and things around Saul through the door? That wasn't something Saul wanted to see. He looked down at his feet. Now his shoe tip had already extended beyond the platform. Below was also pitch black, occasionally showing flickering stars. When Saul first encountered black tide pollution, the diary had displayed great power, forcing back the black waves that had nearly swallowed Saul. But thinking about it now, perhaps it wasn't only the diary that had exerted force at that time. After Wizard Kent jumped down, he was immediately polluted by the stars and died. But nothing happened on the circular platform. Does this mean jumping down would bring me closer to you? Saul's left foot moved forward, suspended in air. "Then shall I jump down too, so we can have a proper chat?" Of course, Saul wasn't planning to jump immediately, but intentionally paused. Then, not very surprisingly, he saw a string of text appear on the diary above. "Lunar calendar year 319, November 27th. You choose to be willful for once, approaching the truth. But you don't possess the ability to accept the truth. However, the truth still loves you, even if your consciousness has already been annihilated. They will command your good friends to take care of your homeless soul and capricious body. Tusk. Saul clicked his tongue, then immediately retracted his left foot and even stepped back 3 paces. He looked at the surrounding stars and didn't give up. Since I'll die if I go over there, can you come over here so we can communicate properly? Suddenly thinking of something, Saul quickly added, "Oh right, when you come over, please control your power. Don't be like when I went over there myself and got annihilated again." The surrounding stars still showed no response. Still can't communicate, Saul frowned. This was his consciousness space, where no other forces could enter, only mental power could influence this place. So Saul had chosen what seemed like the somewhat foolish method of direct conversation. This was actually him using his spirit and consciousness to try communicating with the stars. But now it seemed that for unknown reasons, the stars weren't responding to him. Saul wasn't anxious either. He simply sat down on the ground, propping one hand on his knee and supporting his chin with the other. Are the stars unable to understand what I mean, or do they not want to pay attention to me, or are they simply not hearing me? Although his first communication attempt had failed, Saul had no intention of giving up. After advancing to second rank, the time he could spend in his consciousness space was also longer than before. Now, feeling his mental fatigue level, he should still be able to stay for a while longer. It shouldn't be that they can't understand. After all, this is my consciousness space. The meaning of my words should be directly transmitted without language interference. Could it be that they simply don't want to acknowledge me? But thinking about the cheerfully flickering stars around him and the colorful pupils that appeared behind people like Jiajiagu, looking left and right, he felt these stars didn't seem like aloof existences either. Could it simply be that the distance is too far? The mental waves I'm emitting haven't accurately reached those stars. That would be very troublesome. Going directly to the other side would mean death, but trying to call them over, his voice wasn't loud enough. Thinking about this, Saul slowly straightened his waist, his gaze falling on his hand that was propped on his knee. How about taking a gamble? I haven't exactly been sparing with self-amputation lately anyway. Thinking it, doing it, Saul's left hand immediately detached itself from his wrist. There was no feeling of pain, but the emptiness of soul loss immediately surged to his heart. Am I using this too much? Saul only felt his mind becoming dizzy in waves, as if he might be kicked out of his consciousness space at any moment. Although he could directly replenish his spiritual body and soul body by absorbing soul fragments, this splitting of large amounts of soul body still made Saul somewhat unable to bear it. But a small amount wouldn't work either. After all, the stars were too far from him and had destructive power themselves. If he split off too little, Saul feared his soul fragments wouldn't have time to convey his meaning before being directly crushed by the star's pressure. Looking at his left hand suspended above his right hand, Saul could still feel the faint connection between himself and the severed palm. As long as he wanted, he could reattach the severed hand. But Saul resisted the temptation to take back the severed hand and imprinted his mental power on it. Then he unhesitatingly gave the severed hand a gentle toss. The thrown palm suddenly transformed into a semi-transparent gray bird, flapping its wings as it flew toward the pitch-black distance. Saul watched the distance with some anxiety, not knowing whether he would receive a response this time. If there was still no effect, he could only leave the consciousness space first, wait for his body to recover, then enter the consciousness space again to try resolving the star's hidden danger. Just as Saul was looking left and right, and his gaze turned to the stars overhead for the third time, he suddenly saw a shooting star. It was diving straight toward him,